And we are back. Irish IB Nation, I should say. I was going to say Irish Nation, but Irish Breakdown Nation. We're back for another podcast. It is Tuesday, September 20th, and we are a few days away from the Notre Dame, North Carolina game. And this week we are going to kind of get back on a normal schedule, and we're going to break down this North Carolina Tar Heel team, and we're going to break down the matchup between Notre Dame and North Carolina today. We are going to basically dive into North Carolina in all phases of the game. Tomorrow, we'll dive into sort of the on-paper matchup, the run game versus run game, pass game versus pass game. Have some fun with that. Thursday, I will be in my Virginia office, and we will do keys to victory. And then Friday, we will do our predictions. We'll have the Notre Dame game predictions and obviously some of the other big games of the weekend, right? And just another interesting, intriguing weekend of college football, Ryan, that I'm looking forward to discussing on Friday. So it's going to be another good weekend. And, of course, the Notre Dame North Carolina game is going to be one of the big matchups in college football, but, of course, the most important matchup for us. And what we're going to do today, Ryan, is just dive into the Tar Heels because this is a 3-0 team coming into this matchup undefeated. They have not really been tested yet by a great team, but App State is obviously a good football team a week after losing to North Carolina at the end of the game, a game that North Carolina controlled for most of the game. App State kind of had some fluky things happen late. North Carolina didn't put the game away where they should have, but ended up getting the job done. They won that game, and of course, they beat a Georgia State team that is 0-3 right now, is coming off of a loss to Charlotte, and then of course beat Florida A&M. So their toughest test so far was a road win at Appalachian State, which is a good win. Notre Dame has a home loss to a Sun Belt team that I don't think is as good as Appalachian State. So this is a quality football team, but a team that we're still learning a lot about, Ryan.
Yes. I think it's really well put. I mean, the numbers, because there's context to numbers all the time, right? But I think there's really context to these numbers, right? And it's context in both directions, Brian, because you're going to see some numbers you're like, okay, but they're not playing the best of competition, or these inflate a little bit. And there's some numbers that you're like, wow, that's alarming considering the fact that they haven't played a lot of great teams. But you're right. I mean, we haven't seen them tested against what we would consider a truly good team as of yet, right? Like a good Appalachian State team that beat Texas A&M, but no great teams on the schedule yet. So it's a lot of question marks right now, but that's why it makes it fun, is we're kind of predicting what is the tangible stuff moving forward when they get into the tougher meat of their schedule, and what is kind of a little bit of smoke and mirrors. But either way, a lot of talented players in this North Carolina roster. So I'm excited to get down to the scheme and a little bit of some of the players that we should be keeping an eye on.
When you talk about context, right, you can say, well, they're scoring a lot of points, but they haven't played anybody. And I would say, yes, that is true, but they also have played the last two games without their best player as well.
Yes.
And so it just kind of feeds into, Ryan, we could kind of point this in different directions. This will be the first big test for North Carolina. Notre Dame will be, at least the Notre Dame defense will be. This is an opportunity to be a get-right game for the Notre Dame offense, because if you can't get right this game, there are major problems that need to get just major problems. It's also a game, too, that to me is going to show us a lot more about the Notre Dame defense. And I think, we saw them play very well in the opener, not great in week 2, pretty good in week 3. They've had 2 pretty darn good weeks mixed in with a little bit of a letdown game against Marshall. How are they going to be able to prepare for this type of offense with just a week to prepare? I think that's going to be a really interesting aspect to this as well. They had a whole offseason to get ready for Ohio State's offense. Didn't prepare great for Marshall. Cal's offense is a little bit easier to prepare for, if we're going to be honest with you about it. So this is going to be a big test, obviously, for Al Golden as well. Al Golden and his coaching staff. So just so many important storylines, Ryan. But the biggest one for Notre Dame is you've got an opportunity to go on the road, get a win over a Power 5 team, and go into the bye week with a little bit of, hey, we're headed in the right direction, right? And then a loss sends you in the bye week kind of starting. I mean, you're really going to have to be back to square one and figure some stuff out. So very, very interesting game, and a really good test for Notre Dame. And so let's dive into North Carolina, Ryan. And the biggest thing is, as we were kind of talking about the numbers beforehand, I'm going to pull this up. This is a tale of 2 completely different football teams. And I'm not talking about Notre Dame and North Carolina. I'm talking about North Carolina's offense and North Carolina's defense, because one is excellent, one of the best in the nation, and the other is terrible and one of the worst in the nation. And I'm going to pull this up. This is from our article that we published this morning. It's the kind of the opponent first glance of North Carolina. And this isn't nutty. You're looking at these numbers. On the left, you're going to see, looking from your left, you're going to see the offensive ranks in the ACC for North Carolina. As you can see, they're either first or second in a lot of different categories. And on the right is the rankings of the North Carolina defense in the ACC. Now, just for those who aren't sure, the ACC has 14 teams. So there's a lot of rankings where they're last, like dead last or second to last. I mean, their best ranking is their 9th and third down efficiency. Ryan, that is a really, really ugly number. And when you talk about context, right, the one good team that they played this year on third down defense, Appalachian State, went 6 of 12. They held 0-3 Georgia State to 4 out of 16 on third down. And Florida A&M, who's a 1AA team that was missing 20-some scholarship players from their roster going into that game, was held to 38.5%. So even that, the context is, even the number where they're not out of the top 10 is a little bit misleading. When you consider they rank this low and you think about who they've played, it gets a little bit alarming. Now, the points per game, Ryan, is a little bit, I would say a little bit misleading just because of the way that App State kind of charged back and all that kind of stuff. But they haven't been very good in the other two games either. No. But one game can, when you've only played 3, one game can kind of skew your stats a little bit. But they gave up 24 points to Florida A&M, and they gave up 28 points to Georgia State, who has yet to win a game. That's not good, Ryan. And they gave up 235 rushing yards to Georgia State. That's not good.
I kind of poked a little fun at him. I think it was last week or the week before, Brian, because I just said, I thought Jay Bateman was fired. I didn't know that he's still the defensive coordinator, man. And it's puzzling a little bit, if we're being honest, because Gene Chizik's a respected defensive mind, right? And you have, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, during the show, but there's some talent on this North Carolina defense. That's why it's just very odd how bad they have been, man. But it's just been bad across the board. It's a team that's not very creative defensively. They've been trying to just kind of let guys do their thing and do their job. And for whatever reason, man, it is just not pretty on the defensive side of the football. So, man, I just, can you imagine those practices right now where you have that North Carolina offense versus the defense? You're just like, well, that was easy. But then you're just kind of like, well, is it easy because our offense is so good or the defense is so bad? And it's a little bit of both right now, man, if we're being completely honest. I'm not sure what the major issue, Brian. I mean, maybe it's a transitional period to a new coach and breaking bad habits. That's possible, right? But right now, this defense is a bad unit, man. It's really bad, and you're countered with an offense that has the potential to being one of the best in college football. You
talk about the recruiting aspect, the talent that North Carolina has, and that's obviously debatable. We could always debate that, who's playing well, who's not, who's athletic but not talented, who's talented but not maybe athletic. There's always those debates for any week. But you talk about those people that care about recruiting. North Carolina has 6 former 4-star recruits, including 5 former 4-star recruits and 1 former 5-star recruit in their starting lineup on defense. Same number as Notre Dame. Notre Dame has 6 former 4-stars. They have 2 former top 100 recruits in their starting lineup in Desmond Evans and Tony Grimes, who's a 5-star player coming out of high school when you look at the 247 composite list. Notre Dame has 6 former 4-stars starting on defense, none of which are former top 100 players. The only former top 100 player that really gets any playing time for Notre Dame right now is Houston Griffith. That's it. So, and yet Notre Dame, and now here's the interesting story. North Carolina's defense, actually, if you look at the rankings of a lot of these players that play for them, it's a lot of highly ranked kids on there. Notre Dame's offense, which struggles, for those who want to focus on recruiting rankings, they don't recruit enough. 10 of Notre Dame's starting players on offense were either 4 or 5-star recruits coming out of high school. 9 4-star recruits, and then a 5-star recruit, Michael Mayer. The only 3-star is Joe Alt, who's arguably been their best offensive lineman through three games, right? Which is kind of funny. So everybody talks about, you got to recruit better. It's like, well, recruit better for what, right? I mean, recruiting-wise, if you're someone who cares about rankings, North Carolina's defense has more 4- and 5-star recruits in their starting lineup than their offense. Only have 5 on offense. And then you look at their defense, they have more former 4- and 5-star recruits, yet their defense is abysmal. So they're the same story, but flipped. The Notre Dame team has a bunch of highly ranked former 4-star, 5-star recruit on offense, and that doesn't even include, looking at 4 stars coming off the bench like Audric Estime, Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather, Eli Raridan, Kevin Bauman, Kane Barong. We could do this all day. Yet the Notre Dame offense stinks. North Carolina has several 4-star players that either are coming off the bench or don't even play on defense, and yet their defense stinks. Neither of the 2 areas of strength, they don't have a lot of former 4-star recruits, although I will say this, the North Carolina skill players are where you get a lot of their 4-star players, and that's what makes it a little bit interesting. So very intriguing matchup, Ryan, and you and I were joking before the show. If you could take the North Carolina offense and the Notre Dame defense and make one team, that'd be a really good football team right now.
It sure would. It sure would. I mean, Brian, honestly, going back to the defense real quick and just kind of how weird it is on the North Carolina side, I was even thinking before the show, I'm like, as from a coaching perspective, right? From a coaching perspective, would I like to work with Malik Murphy? Heck yeah, I would, man. He's a really talented player. Yeah. Desmond Evans, right? Is the strong side defensive end for them. I would love to work with him. Noah Taylor,
even higher than Miles Murphy was.
Yes. Noah Taylor wasn't even a high. Yeah. And Noah Taylor wasn't even a high star recruit, but he was a really talented player at the University of Virginia, former transfer. I would love to work with him. I would love to work with both corners and the safety Cam Kelly. I would like to work with all those guys, but for whatever reason, it's weird because I would say, although all those players are extremely talented, have any of them even hit close to their ceiling? Like across the board, man, it's just like stagnant development for whatever reason, right? That's the weird part. But to your point, the offense on their side, I mean, you want to talk about, and we'll get into kind of the geek out stuff about like scheming things open, right? But man, their system really does a lot with, I mean, the offensive line for the North Carolina that we didn't, it isn't very good, but yet they're able to get their players in space and take advantage of the great things. So it's really weird how on one side there's a creative offense, creative to the extent of like, hey, we're going to be creative getting our football players the ball in space, not so much from a schematic perspective, but creativity on the offensive side. And Brian, for me, like the biggest thing is like defensively, I think they're really vanilla. Mm-hmm. And it's odd because I think that Gene Chizik came in and was like, hey, we're going to just be simple this year and we're going to kind of let our guys be guys. But the problem is that none of the guys are guys yet. Right. So it's not just very awkward. Yes, not yet.
And Notre Dame needs to make sure that this isn't the game that they get right. Because both of those sides of the ball are looking at this as a get right game. The Notre Dame offense is saying, hey, this is a get-right game for us. We can get growing against what's been a terrible defense. And the North Carolina defense is probably like, hey, we're going to look to get right against the Notre Dame offense that's afraid to throw the ball beyond 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. You know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting. I want to ask you a question, Ryan, before we dive specifically into North Carolina, because we're going to begin with their offense, and it kind of sets that up. Can you name a team, and this is an honest question, can you name a team that has an air raid offense that's actually good on defense?
No, I don't. I'm thinking, okay, so Western Kentucky, no. Lincoln Riley's tutelage, no. No, I don't think I can. Ole Miss is not good on defense. Yeah.
Mississippi State's not good on defense.
That's a good point, man. Maybe there's something to time of possession that might be something.
No, and not just time of possession too, but you're practicing against this unique offense.
True.
And does that help prepare you for when you're not facing another air raid team? And there's just a lot of stuff like that makes me wonder, like, somebody said USC. USC's not good on defense.
No.
They're not good on defense at all.
They're playing better than I anticipated they would play, but they're still not good, right? Like it's just a little better.
Look, Fresno was running on them until their quarterback got hurt. USC still would have won that game, but Fresno was rolling on them until their starting quarterback got hurt. They gave up 221 rushing yards to Stanford. Stanford averaged 86 rushing yards a game last year. Their defense stinks.
And they lost their two best running backs from last year too, Stanford speaking, right? So it's like, even more context to that, right? Like that's not great. Now I'm like hitting memory banks here.
They ran for about 50 more yards against USC than they ran against Colgate. Stanford did, for context. Just want to throw that out there a little bit.
The Fighting Toothpaste. I love it, man.
The home of O'Donnell Foyle.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was trying to like dip into the memory banks, Brian. Like over recent years, has there been any air raid teams that have had a good defense?
That's what I'm saying. Because
not even just this year though. Like I remember
right.
Washington State, I think defense played pretty well under what's his name that's at USC now,
Leach.
Grinch. The 1 year when they had Leach there, they were good 1 year. But besides that, I really can't think of a defense that I would classify as good that's been on the other side of an air raid.
Yep. So that's an interesting aspect that you have to look at when you think about this defense, and also something to think about when I get asked the question, hey, would you love to have Phil Longo as your offensive coordinator? I said, well, if for some reason Tommy Rees departed Notre Dame, would I look at Phil Longo? Heck yes. But that is a question you have to ask. What is the structure that you have on offense that you would want to do things and how does that affect it? So it's certainly something that I would look at. It's fascinating. We'll get into that another day. That might be an interesting off-season discussion. When you look at like this, has anybody had a good defense with the air raid? Now, there are some principles that carry over from like what Steve Sarkisian does with an air raid, but it's not really an air raid. No. So, and Bama had a decent defense, not a great defense, but a decent defense. And Texas is improving on defense right now under Pete Kwiatkowski and that staff. So it's an interesting discussion, Ryan. There's no question about it.
Yep.
So let's dive into the North Carolina offense. You saw the numbers, right? We pull the numbers up. The numbers are impressive, right? This is a team that has not played good competition so far, but they've done exactly to that good competition what you expect to do to not good competition, and that is they're scoring a mess of points. They're moving the ball at will. I think some of the things that have plagued Phil Longo's offenses in past years, they've been pretty good at so far this year, one of which is red zone offense. They have not been a great red zone team in the past as far as scoring touchdowns. They are very good so far this year when it comes to that. Again, that comes down to, they haven't played anybody yet, but 6 of their 7 red zone attempts so far have resulted in touchdowns, which has been it was an issue for him at Ole Miss. It was an issue for him in all but 2020 at North Carolina. But right now they look pretty good. So they're doing what you need to do. They're balanced. This is a weird offense, though, Ryan, because when I watch them play, and I've broken down their first 2 games, I didn't get to Georgia State. You took Georgia State, so I could go back and watch last year's Notre Dame game. And they don't impress me. Like when I watch them play, I'm like, yeah, that run game didn't do well that game. And then you look at the numbers, and you're like, okay, that's weird because I watched them play, and I wasn't impressed by what they did. And then you look at 314 rushing yards against Florida A&M. 215 against App State and 183 against Georgia State. And I'm thinking, I remember watching the App State game, and I'm like, they didn't run the ball well against App State. Like, I just wasn't impressed with what I saw. And then you look at the numbers, and they're like 315 yards. And you made a great comment, Ryan. You say they scheme it. It's amazing how big the holes they get in the run game for an offensive line that doesn't block well.
Yes. I mean, that's the biggest thing for me, man, is it is incredible to watch, Brian. Because, like, look, last year or the last couple years, Sam Howell was a good athlete, wasn't a great athlete though, right? Like he won a lot kind of out of structure more than kind of like quarterback run game stuff, right? So we talk about like the numbers game type of thing. And right now, I mean, I like the Drake May kid. I mean, I gushed about him today on my kind of like offensive preview on the boards at irishbreakdown.com, but it's like he's not an extension of the run game either, Brian. But for whatever reason, man, they get guys to crash to one side and they find these massive holes. And again, I think that Phil Longo has a great understanding of how to out leverage players in the run game, right? Like he has a great understanding of that and a great understanding of angles, I think, because the offensive line's not overly good. I just think it's that they do understand angles, though, right? Like they understand where they need to attack to establish leverage. So Phil Longo is one of the best that I've seen, man, because he's an air raid guy on the other side of it, right, Brian? Usually people think air raid and they think Mike Leach, throw the ball over the yard, right?
Right.
Phil Longo wants to run the football, man. Like he does.
The 2 best air raid offenses going on right now are both being run by coaches that have shown a proclivity for running the football in the past. And that is Phil Longo and Lincoln Riley. Now, that was one of the questions I had about Lincoln Riley coming to North Carolina was, would he run the ball? Or, USC was, would he want to run the ball? Because as he got further and further away from Bob Stoops, they got less and less effective, less and less emphasis on the run game. How would that be at USC? Well, they've gone for over 200 yards in each of their first 2 games running the football, and their down game was 164 against Stanford in a game where they really shredded Stanford throwing the football. So, I mean, it's like, they went 20 of 27 to 341 yards. So it's kind of like, okay, how much running did you really want them to do? Average 4.6 yards a carry. It's okay. but they've been good running the football. The two best air raids are both teams that run the football effectively. A couple things about this offense before we kind of get into the specifics of it, because there is some very interesting stuff about this offense. Number one, Ryan, is this is an offense that seeks to be balanced, right? They are going to run the football, and a good chunk of their throws are actually coming off of called run plays because they do a lot of RPOs, which we'll get into. And the other thing too is they've always been willing to use their tight ends formationally, and we'll show a clip against Notre Dame last year. But this year we've seen even more diversity, even though they are mostly 11 personnel so far this year. They've done a decent chunk of 12, but they're mixing up the looks a little bit more and getting their tight ends involved in a lot of different ways than what we've seen in the past as well, Ryan.
Yeah, it's really interesting, man, because they have 3 good tight ends on this team. I mean, Kamari Morales, they have the number 18, whose name has escaped me for some reason right now, the taller tight end whose name will come to me in just a second. But they have him, and then they have another kid who's a little bit of a smaller tight end.
Nesbitt.
But so they have 3 Bryson Nesbitt.
Just looked at the depth chart.
Appreciate it. So, so they have Morales, they have Nesbitt, and then their third stringer actually plays a good bit too, Brian. So, like, they have diversity too, because Morales is like a 6'2.5", 240-plus pound tight end. Nesbitt's kind of a longer 6'5", 230-pounder. And then the third stringer is like 6'1", 240. So they're all completely different body types, different skill sets, and they've been able to mix and match them. I mean, they are, I think, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th on the team in receiving so far this year. So used very differently, but also they kind of fit together, right? Because they have very different skill sets. So it's been interesting to see.
It is. And, you look at them too, Ryan, and I think obviously they've had to adapt a little bit the first 2 games because they haven't had Josh Downs. They had him in the first game. He didn't do a lot. He had like 9 catches, was under 90 yards receiving. So it's like a lot of real quick stuff. Teams were obviously keying him. This is going to sound weird, but I actually think him being out the last 2 weeks has benefited that offense. Because if you look in the opener, they were like force feeding Josh Downs the football. I mean, A&M knew it. North Carolina A&M knew, or Florida A&M knew it. And they were able to put numbers on him. And then when he was out, it forced them to be more balanced. And I think it's opened up a lot more opportunities. The backs have been involved in the run game or in the pass game, which they're going to be involved in the pass game. Obviously, the tight ends have benefited greatly. Well, now you put Josh Downs back into that, and you have to ask yourself, okay, do you go back to what the offense you were with Josh Downs, where we're going to force feed him the ball, or do you continue to run the offense you've been running, and then that's going to allow Josh Downs to maybe get some more looks, and then if you do overplay him, it opens up bigger opportunities down the road. I also think it was good for Drake May more than anything else to have 2 games without Josh Downs, because the one mistake, I guess I could say, that a young quarterback does is when you've got a dude, you just look for that dude. He hasn't been able to do that because none of the guys coming back are overly experienced at receiver or tight end. They're not guys that have a ton of production in the past. So he's had to run the offense. Where does the read take you? If he can keep that going with Josh Downs back, then you're going to see this offense continue to be very, very schematically and structurally really difficult to defend, in my opinion. Right?
And it's looked very differently, to your point, without Downs, because Downs spends most of his time in the slot for North Carolina, right? And without him, you saw a lot more Bryson Nesbitt in the slot or Morales in the slot. So it went from a 5'10", 175-pound dynamite receiver to a big body, 6'1", 6'2", 240, 6'5", 230. So you had a much different kind of approach to the slot position, which was interesting. And I'm interested to see how it's kind of implemented together, Brian, because, in theory, it could be absolutely puzzling to a defense if on one play you have a Bryson Nesbitt, the next play you have Josh Downs in the slot in the same spot, right? Like, that could be something that is kind of drives you crazy a little bit. But on the other hand, it's like, but can you cohesively work them together, or is it going to get clunky? So I'm interested to see that, just how he's not only Josh Downs is implementing the offense and how it kind of runs, but also just structurally going from big slot to smaller slot, big slot, or if you kind of use them in cohesively together in some way. I'm interested to see how they implement all those guys, because they are very different style slot players, but they each have their strengths, but they also are not seamless fits, right? Like, they're not players that just that fits perfectly together, right? Like you have to be creative with that. So I'm interested to see just how the slot position especially looks for North Carolina with Downs coming back.
So Ryan, let's dive into some film here. All right,
Love it.
let's check out this North Carolina team, and we're going to begin with the run game. Now, the first thing about their run game, Ryan, is a lot of their run game is built off the RPO. They're going to have some sort of RPO action constantly, and I think that's one of the things that makes their run game effective is because you're chasing Josh Downs as they're running an outside zone or a mid zone, or we're going to call it inside zone. It's not a traditional inside zone. It's not really mid zone either per se. So I'm not sure what they call it. We'll call it inside zone. Their run game is basically this, Ryan: inside zone, outside zone, counter, all plays we know, all plays we've talked about. They're going to run quarterback draw off RPO action, and they'll just call a quarterback draw. You can tell that it's just a called quarterback draw because the receivers just go downfield and block, and then they'll run a G wrap, right? And so we're gonna talk about that play. But everything that they do, almost their entire run game, is built around RPOs, right? And I think that's one of the things that makes it challenging. And what I like about their RPO system is it's not just bubbles and quick outs. They run a really complex RPO package that I think a team like Notre Dame needs to be able to study a little bit more and mimic, to where you can have a little bit more complexity to protect against. If you're going to bring your safeties down, fine. We'll throw behind them in the RPO game. And that's something air raid teams do. It's something that Steve Sarkisian is one of the few non-air raid coaches I know that will throw vertically and behind safeties and linebackers with the RPO game. Most just do it as like the quick game, the snags, the bubbles, the outs, the now screens and stuff like that. So that's part of it too. So inside zone, outside zone, Ryan, we all know. We've talked about counter. We've talked about a lot. Quarterback draw. Everybody's understands that. I want to talk about the G wrap scheme a little bit though, Ryan, because I think this is kind of the one where they've hit some big stuff, and this is also a play that they hurt Notre Dame with last year. So this is against Appalachian State. You can see App State's sort of in their 3-down alignment, although they're a 3-3 team, 3-4 team, but it's kind of like a jack stand-up guy. But essentially, they are going to run their G wrap scheme to the left. Okay, and so it's going to be one of two ways. So let's just get this going here. All right. So what you're going to see here is this tackle right here is going to block that end. Now, one of two things is going to happen here. If this end stays inside, then it's going to turn into a down block. If this end crosses his face, then he will go with him and he'll ride him out. And then the pulling guard in the back will have to read that block. So this block right here, Ryan, is the block that will be read for the insertion point. So keep that in mind as we talk about this play. But on this particular play, they down block and this guy gets sealed inside. Now, that's important because we're going to show what happened to Notre Dame last year when they had a 52-yard touchdown run on this play. And we're going to show what happened. So basically, it's just sealing the inside gaps here by both of these guys. Now, this guard right here is going to step inside, secure his A-gap. And if the A-gap does not get an immediate threat, then he's going to climb and wall off that linebacker. So he's got him out leverage. He's going to try to wall that guy off. Ryan, I've seen this blocked two different ways. On this particular play, the guy went wide, so he just blocked it. This looked like a gap hinge to me, I think is kind of what they normally do. Just to protect, that hard B gap crash. And then you're just going to see the back step and kind of come downhill. This guard is going to pull around for a point of entry. Okay. And that's what I say. This guard, the back's not the only person making a read on this play. And then you have a kick out here. So the guard comes around and he sees this seal block right here inside. So he actually goes outside here and blocks that back or blocks that linebacker. Right. So you've got it there. So you see that. He gets here, and then the back steps, goes downhill. So he's kind of attacking A-gap, strong side A-gap, which is right here. So insert to then follow out. So then he's got to follow the guard outside, and he ends up bouncing it outside for a nice chunk run. That is an example, Ryan, of their G scheme, which is a major component of air raid offenses. This is one of the unique things that they do. We'll go to the next version of that play here, which is against Notre Dame. This is last year against Notre Dame. So this was the 52-yard touchdown run from Ty Chandler, and you see a very similar thing happen. So Notre Dame keeps this end inside, and he blocks it down. To me, when this play gets stopped, Ryan, it's when you can have your end or your edge set that tackle hard and funnel everything back inside. That's when Notre Dame was able to have some success. Notre Dame did not have as much success against their run game in a 3-down front as they did in a 4-down front. That's the conundrum that you find yourself. You can shut their run game down with a 4-man front much more effectively than a 3-man front, but in a 4-man front, you don't have as many people and many resources to defending the pass. And that was kind of the spot that Notre Dame found themselves in. So you had a good block here, right? And then just the down blocks here basically secured, kind of washed everything inside, okay? Yeah. So these down blocks here, this linebacker, Jordan Patejo, kind of scraped, and instead of scraping over the ball, just kind of crashed into the line. Nana Osafa-Mensah beat this guy inside, but he did a really nice job of stepping and keeping a body on. But these down blocks right here, Ryan, stopped Nana's progress. Nana actually had beat the guy inside. Guy got a body on, but then because the nose tackle and the 4-eye basically over here, this is the 4-eye, they got kind of washed down, which then Nana crashed right into him. So they were able to block Nana because of what the other guys were doing. And then the linebackers got sealed inside. So you had the H-back here blocked J.D. Bertrand out, and then the puller got around this and then blocked Drew White. And Drew did not do a very good job of getting over top of that block. And the safety came down, took a poor angle, and next thing you know, it's out the gate. He went right there for a 52-yard touchdown. And so you blocked it up pretty well, and it all comes down to this play. And it sounds simple, Ryan, but it's harder to stop. The only way it's easy to stop is if you know it's coming, right? Right. You got to set the edge. You cannot let this. Basically, what you cannot let this guy get here. You can't let him get to the second level. What you need to do is you either need to set the edge with the end, or what I've seen other teams have success with is if this guy stays inside, this guy will crash hard inside and blow that up. So once he goes out here, and this was a free release by that H-back. Once he goes there, and you know you're here, you've got to fit that sucker hard and blow up that puller in the backfield, and either force the back to cut back inside where it's clogged up, or force him to bounce. Right, that's what we talk about. There's either spill outside or force inside is really the correct. That's still the terminology I believe people use, Ryan. Yep. At least it was when I was coaching. So either spill it outside where, Cam Hart and J.D. Bertrand are now there, because if this guy has an inside angle on J.D. Bertrand, if you bounce it outside of J.D., J.D.'s now free to come off and make that play on the perimeter, as is Cam Hart. If you force him to spill back inside, then all of this was clogged up and there was nowhere to go. So that edge block and not letting that guard get upfield is a really big component to being able to shut down their G-Rap, which is something that they're going to run a pretty decent amount against Notre Dame, especially when you consider they had a 52-yard touchdown against Notre Dame last year on this particular play. And because Notre Dame's linebackers are not flowing hard. The counter in the G scheme, the G-Rap stuff is something I would do a lot against Notre Dame with how their linebackers are playing. Those are two things that I think we're going to see a lot of this weekend. Yeah,
and it's interesting too, Brian, because it's on that play that you just drew up there, the G-Rap. So on that play, you need that front side defensive end, which is your strong side defensive end. He's got to be a dude, man. Like, he can't get washed. He has to be a dude. He has to be able to fight pressure, right? So you think about your Riley Mills of the world. Yes. So when he gets down blocked, because he's an inside shade, like you say, he's in a 4-eye. So when he gets down blocked, man, you have to fight outside pressure. Like, you have to use that outside arm, and you need to kind of fight back to where that offensive lineman is trying to clear out there right off of his butt. And for Drew White, I mean, again, you already mentioned it, right? For the Mike linebacker, when it would be J.D. Well, won't be J.D. Bertrand in the first half, but just in theory, that's what J.D.'s been playing. You need that guy to be super physical and get downhill in a hurry, man. And right now, this is a worry for Notre Dame, if we're being completely honest, because Notre Dame is not filling hard, right? Like, they're slow to read and react post-trigger right now. And then the will linebacker position, you mentioned Jordan Botelho in this clip. That's the Maris Loifow role in the defense. That guy needs to be fast, and it needs to scrape over hard and play in pursuit. Otherwise, there's going to be a huge gap, and you're going to be down numbers at that point, right? Because it's just going to be a tough situation. So, I mean, yes, this is a position. This is a scheme where, again, they're predicated more on angles, right? Like, they want to create angles to create space. So in that type of system, you need to counteract that with physicality. You need to play hard at the point of attack. Notre Dame hasn't been doing that right now, right? Like, and so a zone blocking scheme, You're more worried about gap integrity, right? And staying firm to your assignment, all that type of stuff. For this position, I mean, yes, you have a gap that you're responsible to in a power system or in this gap system that we're looking at here. But at the end of the day, man, like they need to be physical against this type of team, right? Like that, this type of play that we're looking at where we're kind of breaking down, you need to be physical and you need to play tough at the point of attack and you need to blow stuff up. Counter that momentum early. They're trying to create angles and they're trying to get you on the move. You need to be able to counteract that with physicality. And that's one thing Notre Dame has struggled with up until this point.
Yep. Ryan, next thing I want to kind of get into, obviously we talked about the RPO. The other thing that I think North Carolina does really well is they have a really good play action game. It's not good from the standpoint of like it's super intricate. They don't do a lot off of it, but they do it. And this is something where you can't just be an RPO team. Sometimes you have to be a team that shows run action. And I think they do a pretty good job of that because they do a lot of max pro out of their play action game, or they'll at least keep the tight end and pre-release the back. But they do a lot of max pro type stuff with the back on the check down. And I want to bring up a play that we saw against Appalachian State that was really good, because one thing that they do a really good job of in this particular offense is they did a good job of it last year. We'll show another play where they use it effectively. Is they use their motion man really effectively to manipulate the second level of the defense, and in some instances like this, the third level. Because so right now they start line up and it's not technically a trips because this guy is in a wing position, but you're going to treat it defensively as a trips formation. It's a 3-by-1 to the boundary. Okay. So at the snap, they send this guy in motion over here. Now, what that does is you are now in a bind. Who's going to defend that guy? You've got your linebackers tucked way in here. Your nickel's there. You either have to fly a linebacker out or you're going to roll your safety down. And what most teams are going to do in this look, and what Notre Dame has done often in this look, is they bring their safety down. Okay, so North Carolina does a good job with that. So you have this motion across with this guy, right? And he basically on this particular play just runs a swing route. So he's essentially a check down. He's just, hey, if they cover this, you can check it down to me. Okay, so then they have their back block here. So they're going to show inside zone action with their offensive line. Their back steps down. Now, this is a true play action pass. This is not an RPO. This is a true play action pass. So this guy is here. And then essentially what they do is they have a vertical route here, and then they just do a post route here. And then the danger is the difficulty is because you have to key their run game. They show pure run action. So because it's a play action, they do a hard downhill action. That safety steps down, and this safety has to come down to defend the swing route. Okay, so you're now left with one-on-ones in the perimeter, and they do a good job with this. Now, Sam Howell was a great deep ball thrower.
Sure was.
Drake May so far has been a pretty good deep ball thrower. He especially was against Appalachian State. And their receivers have done a good job making plays with the ball. I mean, they're winning one-on-ones. They're winning a lot of one-on-one throws. And that's exactly what happened here. Because both safeties went down, they just banged this post route. And then they'll throw this go route over here as well. But on this particular play, they did this. Now, there was a play later in the game, Ryan, where they ran a play action, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but they sent a guy kind of up the seam. I think it was like the H-back kind of delayed and then went up the seam. So it wasn't a max pro, but he showed it initially and then kind of released free. When the second level stepped down, he came open on that second level. So you do some really interesting stuff with the play action game as well, Ryan, that again, it shows run, your safeties are coming downhill, and then all of a sudden they're thrown over your head. So what does that mean? That means Notre Dame's corners are going to have to be really, really disciplined on the perimeter, and they're going to have to play the football really, really well down the field, because there are going to be one-on-one shots in this game from North Carolina. How well can the corners defend it? They're going to have to make plays on one-on-ones. Simple as that. They're not going to prevent North Carolina from throwing the balls. When they do throw, you got to be there to make plays. So the corners have been a definite strength of Notre Dame through 2 games. That's going to have to continue against North Carolina.
Yeah, they're going to be tested. I mean, Brian, like the biggest thing for me is that, like you said, manipulating the second and third level, the safeties and the linebackers, you're doing that because you want to create those one-on-one matchups, right? Like they're trying to do that. They're like, my guys outside are better than your guys, right? Like that's basically what I mean, you remember how they did it with like De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome a few years ago, right? Like De'Ami Brown was the guy that they were just trying to get isolated one-on-one, and he was kind of that vertically based receiver. Like that's kind of the same understanding,
That's how
right?
they
Like you're
jumped out
trying
to
to
14 points early against Notre Dame in 2020 before Notre Dame settled in.
Yep, 100%. I mean, they want to create one-on-ones, and then like you mentioned that little tight end pop, like let's just call it a tight end pop pass, right? Like the little seam ball. Phil Longo does that about as good as anybody I've seen, as far as manipulating that second level to get an easy, wide open receiver, as far as a slot receiver or a tight end. Like he does that incredibly well. You think back to what they did at Ole Miss, even with Evan Ingrams of the world. And then they had the Kenny Yeboah kid that was transferred from Temple a couple years ago. Like they have that built in. And this year, especially, like you're seeing guys like Morales and Nesbitt just kind of get open seam balls down the middle of the field. And you're like, how did they get so wide open? Well, they get so wide open because they have this huge emphasis on running the football. They have that run action, and then they just sneak you right behind the linebackers. Like that's how they're doing it because they're manipulating the eyes so well. So that is a big thing for me, man, is that they're manipulating that second level to get easy balls over the middle, and they are working one-on-ones outside. They are trying to manipulate it so that they have those one-on-one matchups because at the end of the day, they believe in their guys to make more plays than the defense will make.
Ryan, I was going to show this play later, but I think with what you just said, it's a good time for it now because it fits into what I had just said and then also what you just said. So this is a play from against North Carolina last year. And what they did is they brought this guy in motion and put him on like a reverse action. And at the snap, Sam Howell fakes a quick handoff, but then really sells the reverse. And so what they did is this tight end right here. Let me get this here real quick. I'm trying to find the levels play. Here we go. So this tight end right here, Max Prode. So again, they're showing run action, right? They're showing they keep this guy in. And then this guy went on a vertical, and it was a lazy vertical. And this guy right here was a tight end that just doesn't catch the ball a whole lot. But because of the action, because of the reverse action on the motion, and because of the run action where their tight end blocks, all of a sudden this guy climbs right over top of the linebackers. The linebackers don't see him because they're reading run. And then all of a sudden he gets over the top. And so this ends up opening up a huge play for Notre Dame or for North Carolina, and they convert this to a guy that I think, if I remember correctly, I'm going to look this up, but I think like coming into that game, he only had like a couple receptions all year, I believe. Let me just give me a second to go find that. So I'm gonna find this particular play because I think that was Bryson Nesbitt that caught that ball on this particular play. Let me pull this up here. So Notre Dame, yes, he had 2 catches on the year coming into that game. He had 3 for 50 against Notre Dame, including that catch right there, which allowed them to kind of go out and really get something going. So I think once again, you look at it and say this is a concept where North Carolina is going to do a lot of things, and Ryan and I talk about this a lot. They do a lot of things to mess with the eye discipline of the defense, whether it's counter stuff. They'll do things where this guy goes out and they'll run their G wrap, like we showed earlier. Out of this look back would be over here in that instance, right? Then they'll also do inside zone here where this tight end blocks backside. They'll do inside zone this way, where this tight end will cross block backside. They'll do things where they'll run these jet motions. They'll do things where they run the reverse motion like here. They really screw with the eyes of a linebacker. And that's something that Notre Dame's linebackers have really struggled with so far this season. And so this is one of the big tests. Talk about, can Notre Dame get their defense rolling? Can they get the linebackers to play better? I think this is one of those plays where it's a big situation where you're going to have to be disciplined and aggressive. And the linebackers last year were pretty aggressive against North Carolina, and I thought they had some success, but there was a couple times where they did get beat because they kind of got caught in between one of the two. And so it can be really hard because you'll find yourself climbing, getting deep to cover, that climb route, and all of a sudden they're handing the ball off, or they're throwing a swing route over here, or they're running a counter. And then the other thing they do off of a lot of this stuff too, Ryan, is they have a really intricate screen game off of this. Now, the interesting thing is we haven't seen the screen game a lot this year since Josh Downs has been out because they don't have a lot of screen receivers. Like Josh Downs is their screen guy. The current group of receivers aren't great screen guys. They haven't thrown a ton, but they will definitely throw a lot more against Notre Dame. So just another example, Ryan, and when I said why you were out is we've talked a lot about eye discipline, and North Carolina does a lot pre-snap and post-snap to really mess with the eye discipline of linebackers. And And they do this, and unlike other teams, one thing I really like about North Carolina, Ryan, is they do a lot of stuff to mess with your eye discipline of the secondary. And that's what I want to go to next with their pass game, is they do a really nice job of one of the things I really like as a concept, and you all have heard me say this before, I really like post-snap switch routes. I think you have to it's not something you make a living on where you do it all day, but it's got to be a part of what you do. And we saw this against North Carolina, against App State. We saw it against Notre Dame last year. You're going to see a lot of this stuff. So basically, backside, you have a solo route here. Now, on this particular play, he ran an out cut. In most instances, Ryan, when you're running this kind of concept, there's going to be some sort of communication between the quarterback and the receiver of what route to run, or you're going to have hey, you've got these three options based on what the defense is doing. Right. So if he's up, you'll have a route, you'll go here. You had an out cut because you had leverage here and you had a one-on-one. Okay. So then to the field, they did a nice post snap switch. So I think this was a tight end. He went on a cross here. No, that's a receiver. This was a tight end. This tight end just went on a quick wide fade vertical, and he's going to read that. If this defender comes up on him, he runs by him. If this defender sees that and tries to go over top of him, he'll hitch up and stop. So it is a vertical route with a read. If you play over top of it, he can stop. And then what they did here is this guy just kind of delayed and then all of a sudden went like this, like just beat the guy inside. And the read on it essentially is, what is the defender on you doing? So what they did here is they ran this corner off. They ran this guy off. So these two guys were taken out. And then what that left them was just an isolation right here. Now, if one of these two guys is going to have to run with the cross, right? Mm-hmm. So then you're going to have one of these two guys is going to be isolated on the back or on the number 3 receiver. Now, what it looked to me like, Ryan, this delay is accomplishing two things. Number one, it's allowing the clears to clear, right? And that's what it's doing, right? Because you can throw the quarterback can throw to these two routes. These are not clear routes only, but it allows the spacing of the play to improve, right? That's the first thing he's doing. The second thing he's doing, in my opinion, based on how they run this play, is he's going to identify who's on him and what that guy's doing. If that guy stays inside, he can simply go like this. He could work a vertical, but what happened here is this guy overplayed it. So he went like this, jabbed, and then just beat him inside vertically, and they hit him right up the seam. Yep. And you're going to see a lot of that kind of stuff. So you have post-snap switch routes on that particular play. There's another post-snap switch concept they'll do with backs. They'll do it with a lot of different players that I really like. I'm gonna go. So that was one that we just saw, and then here's another example of it that I'm going to pull up here. I'm a little bit more prepared in this game on this one with how to get to these concepts. So we not going to fumble with it the way we did the other day. So here's one, Ryan, that I really liked as well. Okay, so again, pre-snap motion here, swing. So you're now messing with the eye discipline of who's got who. Now all of a sudden these guys have to communicate, okay, who's now taking this? Because now, Ryan, what this motion does, and we've seen this with Notre Dame a little bit, when he goes in motion, you now have 4 guys to a side. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to require a check in the secondary. They're not going to be able to stick with the call that they had. They went from basically a 3x2 or a 2x2 with a back to now a 3x1 with a back or a 4x1, depending on how teams identify it. Some teams won't count a back as a guy to that side. They'll just declare back strength. So they'll call it a 3x1, just depends. So this guy goes in motion, and at the snap of the ball, he just does what he does a lot, and he just does a swing route. You got to go route out here by this guy. Now, again, they'll throw that. If you get one-on-one, they'll throw that. Against that look, they won't throw it. They may throw like a back shoulder, throw a stop route, but he's kind of taking that away. And then what you have here is this guy kind of works in and over the middle of the field, right? So the swing, the go, and then the in has really put this defense in a bind. And then what they did is this back right here. So he goes here, he goes there. This back just goes like this, Ryan. Bam, right up the seam. Mm-hmm. And just beats him right up the seam. And Notre Dame, they hit this against – this play did not work, but they ran this against Notre Dame last year, and they hit that back right in. So what happened is this guy went here, this guy came up, this guy went there, and all of a sudden the back's just running free right in that hole. They hit this for about a 20-some yard gain against Notre Dame last year. So these are the things that you talk about that they do, that this part of this version of the air raid, but it's not an air raid only offense. But what a lot of this stuff does is you're not it can be difficult to do post snap switches out there with guys that far apart to the field because there's just so much room to get width, Ryan, and it's a slower developing play. It's easier to do it here, right, with guys closer together. But what they do here is the post snap switch is with the tight end in the back. And so I really like the different stuff that they do out of this. It forces you, okay, if we're playing pure man, then you have to go over or under defenders. If you're playing sort of a pattern match type of thing, it requires a level of communication and decision-making that can turn a guy loose. If you're playing zone, it requires communication on, okay, hey, this guy's coming, you've got this. It is not easy to defend this stuff if you are scheming it right, and they do a really nice job of scheming it. And it's just one of the things where you look at it and say, boy, they put you in some really tough binds, and this is just another example of that, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, it's really fun to watch, honestly, from a coaching perspective, because you're just like, again, how do they scheme up such easy areas, man? But it's literally you're attacking a player and you're making them forced to make a decision in a post snap situation, right? The corner's going to jump there. I'm going to throw this ball. If the safety's going to come down, I'm going to throw it over his head. Like it's so fun because at the end of the day, I mean, it's just manipulating football players in the second and third level. That's what you're looking at. I mean, that play right there, like it's designed like, hey, let's put that slot defender in a bind. Let's put him in a bind. Let's put that safety in a bind. You're putting players in a bind and you're making them guess wrong at the end of the day. It's a guessing game. And
you can guess it right 9 out of 10 times. And if you go back and watch the Notre Dame North Carolina game last year, Notre Dame, and you and I were discussing this before the show, they had a lot of 0-yard gains, minuses, 2-yard gains, 1-yard gains. They didn't move the ball consistently well against Notre Dame. What they did a great job of was chunk plays.
Yes.
And some of it was just assignment mistakes, like the G wrap. That was just not executed well by the defense. They didn't put them in any kind of bind. They just did that linebacker level, DN level. Somebody made a mistake there. Somebody's made mistakes, and it just opened up a wide hole. But like on that climb route that we showed, like that puts you in binds. Does the safety help out over top on the go route? Does he come down and take the climb? Do the linebackers take the climb? Do they play the run? Are they going to play the swing action that's going out over there? I mean, who are you more worried about, Bryce Nesbitt on the climb or Josh Downs in space on the swing route? Like I'm a little bit more worried about Josh Downs on the swing route, which then opens that up. It's not, but the thing is they don't run a lot of stuff. It's just they do it in so many different ways. They do it with a little bit of tempo that they put you in a lot of binds. And the one thing that Phil Longo does is he does a nice job of saying, okay, who do we want to isolate on this particular play? Yes. What is the 1 to 2 level that we're going to do where we're going to isolate you? And so they'll run horizontal stretch with all verts. They'll do that a little bit, but they do a lot of vertical stretch stuff where it's like high lows. And what those do is those put certain defenders in binds, so like they'll run I've seen them run curl flat, with some kind of third entry into it. Right. And you don't see a lot of people run a curl flat anymore. Air raid teams still run curl flat because of the way they run it. They almost get turned it into a triangle concept where you've got a decision to make. And it really is a fun offense to study and watch. And the key is if they can protect the quarterback, then it gives them a lot of opportunities. And last year, Notre Dame missed a lot of sack opportunities. And we're going to get into this when we get into the keys to the game. But the big thing is, when you get Carolina in an opportunity to create a negative, you have to do it because it's a much easier offense to defend when they're behind the sticks.
Yes.
Because now you don't have to worry about the motion and all the backs. Hey, look, we're defending the pass here, right? Keep it in front of you, rally to the football, and that makes them a lot easier. It makes all offenses easier to defend, and the air raid is no different. Yep. But the spacing they create and the binds that they put certain defenders on is what makes this a really intriguing, challenging offense to defend.
And it's something too, Brian, where I said this earlier, but I just want to reiterate it again. Notre Dame's not playing very well in the second level right now, right? And you're playing an offense that preys off of making second level defenders look bad. Like it's what it's based off of, man. So it's not a great matchup in theory for Notre Dame defensively. But it's one that they'll have to win in this game, right? Like they'll have to because no matter how well you play for Notre Dame, North Carolina's still going to score some points. They are. Like, they're that talented, right? But they really have to mitigate and kind of limit the impact that they can have. And by doing that, they have to play good, sound, disciplined football, in my opinion. Like, you can't be manipulated too much because there's going to be times where you're going to have to make a decision, right? And it's not necessarily guessing because, like, you're playing to whatever your responsibility is on a play, but North Carolina's still going to make a play on that because, again, you're putting players in a bind. So no matter how they guess or how they react, you're going to have another player open. So that makes it why it's so difficult. But again, Notre Dame has to come to play on the second and third levels in this game, man. They have to because they're going to get manipulated a ton. And then up front, you need to get home. You need to. Yeah. And again, it's not the keys to the game today, but you need to win those one-on-one matchups. That's like kind of where it comes down to for me.
Ryan, D. Trollhunter, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the week, but D. Trollhunter asks, isn't Marist's game against North Carolina from a few years ago one of the reasons people are so high on his potential? And you're absolutely right. The reason Notre Dame was able to shut North Carolina down in 2020, they held them to, was it 17 points? They scored on each of their first two possessions, and after that, Notre Dame completely shut them down. The big reason for that success, Ryan, was in that matchup, Notre Dame dominated them. I mean, they won at the line of scrimmage. That was a big part of it. But the other reason is the Notre Dame linebackers played really, really well. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had a huge game because Kyle Hamilton got kicked out right before the half. He didn't play the entire second half. So Notre Dame played that game without Kyle Hamilton. And then Tariq Bracy got yanked for Clarence Lewis. Clarence settled down. North Carolina had a couple penalties that got called back. They called back one big play, but they dominated the point of attack, and the linebackers flew to the ball, did their job, and dominated. The problem is this linebacking core doesn't have a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. And Clark Lee made the game plan, I felt, in 2020 really simple for the linebackers. You have this to this. That's it. You have this to this. And I think that allowed them to play really fast. And if Al Golden is going to try to give the linebackers, here's the mistake you can make as a defense. And this is exactly what Phil Longo wants you to do. He wants you to give your linebackers a lot of different options on a play because he's going to have something that's going to hurt them. And he wants them guessing because then he'll just run it down your throat all game. They'll do all this, stuff with RPO looks and motions and jets and all this other kind of stuff to get your linebackers thinking. He's just going to 4 or 5 yard you to death with the ground game. If you try to overplay the ground game, the thing I like about Phil Long is fine. We'll run it 50 times. I don't have to throw it. We'll run it 50 times. I mean, Miami tried to do that in 2020. Do you remember that? Miami just came out that game and they were just like, hey, look, we're not going to, we're going to play off and we're going to defend the pass. And North Carolina just came out and ran it 554 yards in that game. And they were just giving them the run game. You remember that game? And Miami just never really adjusted. So yeah, they want your linebackers thinking. I mean, you look at in past years. I mean, this year so far they've ran the ball 44 and 40 times in two different games. Last year they had a 52-yard game against 52 carry game against North Carolina, 41 carry game for 300 yards against NC State, 392 yards for rushing yards on 47 carries against Virginia in a win. 43 carries for 399 against Virginia Tech in 2020, 55 carries for 326 in a win over NC State. Phil Longo will run the ball if you don't stop the run. So he's not he's not a Mike. He is. It's funny. He's a Mike Leach disciple, but he's taking this offense in a completely different direction than what you would than what Mike Leach has done. And that's what makes it so hard to defend. Because if your linebackers are thinking a lot, then he's going to run it on you. What Notre Dame did in 2020 is they said, you are not going to run the football on us. And then you trust your secondary guys to make plays on the ball, and you trust your pass rush to get to the quarterback. They're going to need to have a very similar game plan this week. And that's what they did against Ohio State. And Ryan Day is not an air raid guy, but there's a lot of similar principles between what he does and Phil Longo does. A lot of cross, a lot of mesh, a lot of isolating defenders. Run game is very similarly structured. Would you agree with that, Ryan? Very similar structured 100%. Run game. So there's a lot of principles you've already seen from a really athletic, explosive offense. And what Notre Dame did against Ohio State is they said, hey, our D-line's got to play, and then we're going to cover. The D-line did actually play that well in that game, in my opinion. They had some moments here and there, but they didn't play that well. If the D-line can play like it did this past week, then and the secondary continues to play like they're playing, then they'll be able to keep the points down. but you have to be able to stop the run because Phil Longo, if you play to stop the pass, he will run it on you all day and not even think twice about it. Right? So I like to say he did that because of us, Ryan. I say jokingly. Because I actually coached against – I didn't know this until today. I actually coached against Phil Longo back in the day. When I was at Duquesne, he was at LaSalle. He was the offensive coordinator at LaSalle. And we were a really good passing team. I was the receivers coach, and we just lit people up throwing the football. Well, LaSalle came out and was like, you're not going to throw the ball on us. And so our starting running back ran for over 300 yards, and we had over 400 yards rushing as a team and beat him 62-14. So my claim to fame is I'm 2-0 against North Carolina coordinators under Mac Brown because we beat Jay Bateman that year as well, and we beat Phil Longo. But the point is that's the philosophy he's adopted. Yeah, I love to throw the ball. I love to scheme it up. But if you're not going to play my run, then I'll run it on you all day. And I really like what he does. I really do.
It's really interesting, Brian, because he's an air raid coach who kind of has an old school mentality, right?
Yes.
Like it's a weird kind of mesh, but it works, man. It works, and I love it. I love it personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk a little defense, Ryan.
Yep.
So Gene Chizik, former national champion Gene Chizik, who was also a defensive coordinator for Mac Brown at Texas, I believe, correct, back in the day.
Yes.
Is they went to Iowa State, correct? And then from Iowa State went to Auburn, if I remember correctly, his career arc. Yep. So this is a relationship that goes back a ways. He was brought in to fix what was a really bad North Carolina defense last year. And, you know, last year they gave up 32.1 points per game. They gave up 418 yards per game, 6.1 yards per play, which is just abysmal. And they've been worse so far. Ryan, they're giving up 37.7 points per game. They are giving up 468.3 yards per game and 6.3 yards per play. That is not good. Not good.
No.
So what's going on, Ryan?
Man.
Let's talk about the structure of their defense briefly, and then just kind of talk about some of the struggles that they've had on defense so far this year.
Yeah. I mean, so when you're looking at this defense, it should look pretty familiar to a lot of Notre Dame fans because they're a 4-2-5 system, right? Like, so they're going to play 4 down, they're going to play 2 linebackers, they're going to play 5 defensive backs. And for me, Brian, like the biggest thing is that they have a jack position, which is Noah Taylor, who is a former Virginia transfer. That's their dropped end. So there's a lot of stylistic comparisons, I think, to what Notre Dame wants to do defensively to what North Carolina is trying to do. And for me, it's like right now, Gene Chizik, I think, is really trying to keep everything simple, right? Like, I think that he came into this year just kind of going like, hey, we were a mess defensively last year. Let's not try to change too much. Let's just do simplistic things and let our guys kind of be guys because there's talent that we've already talked about on this defense. And it just hasn't worked at the moment, right? Like, it's just the guys have not turned into dudes right now at this point for North Carolina. But they are a 4-2-5 system. They are not very aggressive at all. Like, you're not going to see a ton of blitzing. Like, I mean, almost at all, unless you're counting that Jack as a blitzer at some points. But, like, they want to rush 4, and they want to get home with 4. And they want to maintain their 2 high looks. They're going to play 2 safeties in the middle of the field. Their rover in their system is a nickel. So they're a 4-2-5 nickel team where their guy's 5'11", 190 pounds.
They're
like
pure 4-2-5 personnel. They're pure 4-2-5 personnel. They're not 4-2-5 rover like who's a linebacker. They are pure 4-2-5 old TCU 4-2-5 personnel. Is that the way to put it? Yeah.
That's a great way to quantify it. And I mean, so they're playing 2 high shells a ton. They're going to be in 2 man across the board, right? So they're playing man underneath and then 2 high system with their 2 safeties. They're going to play match quarters a ton as well. So the moral of that story is that they want to protect the middle of the field. Like, they're a team that wants to play 2 high and not give up a ton down the field. Like, that's kind of their calling card right now. So simplistic is the word that just continues to come to mind, Brian, because they're not a team that's going to be overly aggressive. You're not going to see their linebackers blitz a ton. You're going to see try to get home with 4, and you're going to see 2 cover 2 man, and you're going to see 4 match quarters on the back end. So this is a team that's going to try to keep everything in front of them. Unfortunately, even though they're trying to keep everything in front of them, they're still giving up a lot of explosive plays. Like, that's just kind of what it comes down to right now. So it's a very basic, simplistic defense that right now has not done the job for North Carolina.
So Ryan, the big thing is they're just getting gashed. That's the thing for me. Like, you looked at the first game of the year against Florida A&M, and again, it's Florida A&M, so you try not to put too much into it. But the concerns I had in that game were I thought they got ripped up a little bit with the pass game. I thought Florida A&M did a really nice job throwing the football, but they did a really nice job stopping the run. They held Florida A&M to, I think, like 56 yards rushing, something like that. Well, then the next two games, they're still not very good at defending the pass. I mean, Appalachian State threw for 361 yards and 6 touchdowns while completing 69% of their passes. But here was the problem. They not only could not stop the pass, but App State rushed for 215 yards on them. And then Georgia State's coming off of a game in which they rushed for 183 yards on North Carolina. So they are really struggling right now to stop. I'm sorry. Let me go here to North Carolina. Sorry, they gave up 288 yards to – I actually looked at that offense. Yes. So App State passed for 361 yards and 6 touchdowns. That was accurate. I was wrong on the rushing numbers. They actually rushed for 288 yards and 6.7 yards per carry against App State, and they gave up 235 rushing yards to Georgia State, who is 0-3 and just lost to Charlotte. So I mean,
they gave up over 600 yards against App State.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they were close to 700 in that game.
That's insane, man. I know they gave up 40 points in the fourth quarter in that game.
649. Yeah, 649, 8.2 yards per play. Yeah.
Not great.
Yep.
Not great.
No, it's not. It's not good at all. So that, Ryan, you look at defensively, the strange thing is there's like when I watch North Carolina on offense, I think their quarterback's really talented. Their tight end, Drake May, they don't have a lot of talent on offense the last two games. Now, again, that's without Josh Downs, right? When Josh Downs comes back, he's a dude. You and I are both very high on Josh Downs.
Yes.
But outside of him and the quarterback, it's not a great team. Like, it's not an elite talent. Like, I don't see this is nothing like talent-wise what they had 2 years ago when they had like Michael Carter, Javonte Williams were both significantly better players than anybody they have right now. With all due respect to their outside receivers, none of them are as good as De'Ami Brown was, in my opinion.
No.
And so, and the offensive line's not as good. The thing is, though, it's such a good scheme. When I look at their defense, I'm like, there's more athletes on their defense than they have on their offense.
Yes.
It's really bizarre. Like, they are on defense what Notre Dame is on offense, where you're like, they are not as – the talent is not that bad of what we're seeing. And that's the strange thing that we're seeing. Is like there's actually some dudes you're like, dude, athletically, that guy can really play, especially their secondary and their front. And so it's a little strange to see the way that they're playing right now, Ryan.
Well, and that's one thing that I said in the opening, Brian, is like defensively, if I was a coach, I would love to have several of the players at North Carolina's trotting out there on the starting lineup. But for what reason, man, like it just is not materialized and is not tangibly turned into production. Like it's just not great right now, man. So again, I mean, it's a little bit of a struggle right now for a North Carolina team. And it's kind of a head scratcher, if we're being completely honest, defensively.
Mm-hmm. So what can is there hope for North Carolina, Ryan? Is there something you can look at and say, hey, fix that and they could be okay? Like, because I don't really see it yet, but you've watched more of it than I have so far.
I think for me, Brian, it's like they need a maturation of their best players to kind of come to the forefront here soon, right? Like we've talked about Tony Grimes, we've talked about Storm Duck, we've talked about Miles Murphy, a defensive tackle. We talked about Noah Taylor, the transfer from Virginia. There's talent, but like it's just none of those guys have ascended into a talented football player to a really good football player. So I don't think it's a scheme thing because, again, they're keeping it simple. It's not like they're doing stuff that it's just like they're overly confused. I just think at this point, their best players that you would call their best players on their defense are not playing great football right now.
They don't play with conviction on defense. That's the problem.
No.
If you're gonna be a simple defense, you've got to play with conviction. And they don't play with conviction. They don't play, you got to fly downhill. Like I think of the 2018 Notre Dame defense. Not a very complex defense. But their linebackers, man, Drew Tranquil and Tavon Coney flew downhill. Their safeties, Jalen Elliott and especially Alohi Gilman, just flew downhill. Their defensive line attacked with purpose. We don't see that from Notre Dame from the North Carolina defense either. So that's what it's a big challenge for them.
It's a defense that's built on speed, and yet there's just zero physicality, man.
Right.
Like that's one thing about Miles Murphy that I'm writing is like Miles Murphy looks the part, man. 6'4", 305 pounds, has some decent foot quickness, but then it's just passive at the point of attack. And I feel like that's like everybody on the roster defensively. It's just like they have size. I mean, Tony Grimes is what, 6 foot plus, near 200 pounds. Yeah. Storm Duck is 6'1", 200 pounds. He's a big kid. Number 9, their safety, who's a pretty decent football player, at least has been pretty productive, is a good sized player as well.
Kelly,
they have some
almost 6'2", 210. Yeah, they're 2 safeties, Ryan. Just to back up your point, both Virginia kids. Cameron Kelly's listed as 6'1.5", 210. Giovanni Biggers is 6'1.5", 200. Tony Grimes is listed as 6'1", 195. Storm Duck is listed as 6'1", 200. Dante Balfour plays a lot. He's 6'1", 180. Don Chapman has played a lot in his career. He's 6'1", 195. The backup field safety is 6'2", 200. And then Marcus Allen, the younger brother of Derek Allen, who used to play at Notre Dame, is one of their backup corners. He's 6'1.5", 175. Their linebackers are 230 to 245. Their edge players, their Jack Noah Taylor is 6'5", 240. Chris Collins also plays at 6'4", 245. Desmond Evans, their big end is 6'6", 265. And then both of their interior defensive tackles are 6'4" and 6'3" and over 300 pounds. Size is not an issue for this football team anywhere.
No.
They just don't play with conviction. And they don't play sound. They make Notre Dame look like an incredibly fundamentally sound tackling football team. Like as far as from a tackling standpoint, that is a big thing of a big problem for them as well. And you said this, there's a lot of plays where their linebackers are in position to make a play, but it's just like they can't make a play.
They miss a lot of tackles, man. They miss a lot of tackles. They miss a lot of assignments. They're not gap sounds in any way. And also, Brian, again, I just think that there's a lack of physicality on this defense, and conviction goes along with that, right? Because it's not. I don't think that they lack power or size. It's just for whatever reason they do not play with a physical sense of urgency at the point of attack. And
that's my biggest issue with this entire North Carolina football team. Even on offense, you and I were talking about this before the show. Though, say, hey, would you like Phil Longo to come to Notre Dame? And I'd say, yeah, in a lot of ways I would. There's one holdup that I have. His offensive lines have never been physical. They run for a lot of yards, but they're not physical. And you had mentioned this, that's one of the changes Ryan said before the show. He said that's one of the changes that Lane Kiffin brought when he arrived after replacing Matt Luke and Phil Longo, is you saw their line play with more physicality. I think there's no reason for him not to be more physical up front. They're running inside, outside zone. They're running counter. They're running G-wrap. Those are all things you can be physical. I thought Lincoln Riley's offensive lines that run the same exact run schemes as Phil Longo's, when him and Bill Bedball were together, they were a lot more physical in the run game than what we're seeing from North Carolina. That's the one big knock. And then how does that impact your defense? When you're not playing an offensive line that just comes off and fires off the ball in practice, and then you've got to face one like Notre Dame's on Saturday, I wonder how that impacts them a little bit, Ryan. And then having to play that team that's just messing with your eye discipline all game, and then you're playing a team that doesn't do that on Saturday, how does that mess with you? I think that's an interesting concept, and that's what posed the original question of, do you know an air raid team that plays really good defense? And I really can't think of one. It's really interesting, Brian, because I never really thought about it until you mentioned before the show about hey, they're not playing against air raid teams every week, so it's going to mess kind of with their eye discipline and stuff. And it's a great point. And again, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with not playing with conviction and not playing with physicality. Because I was even watching a game yesterday, Brian, where both their tackles look the part, right? Yeah. Offensive tackle wise, Asim Richards is 6'4" plus, has pretty long arms. And then they have the right tackle, Spencer Rollins, was actually got draftable grades from the NFL, was a transfer from Harvard. Both these guys look like NFL tackles. They have enough length. He's listed at 6'6", 310, Ryan. Yeah,
they have length. They have size. But then you watch them play, and it's just they're taking zone steps, and when they're engaging with blockers, they're lunging, right? And so when I'm starting with that, I'm like, okay, lunging happens for a couple different reasons usually, right? One, usually the most common one, is that they don't have length, right? They can't play outside of their frame. And both those guys have length, though. So what's the next thing that makes you think, Brian, right? That they're not aggressive at the point of attack and they're kind of lunging because they're not getting their butt underneath of them, right? So I think that just kind of comes across the board, man, offensively and defensively. Even though they're really nice on offense, offensive line-wise, I don't think they play with conviction. Defensively, I certainly don't think they play with conviction. There's just a lack of physicality with this team, which I think is why when they play a really good team, a really good defense, or just a really good team in general, they tend to struggle because they're teams that can kind of take advantage of that lack of physicality.
Yep, absolutely. So, Ryan, that's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag next, but that's going to do it for our wrap-up of of North Carolina. So it gives you a good sense of what they do. It's some really intriguing stuff scheme-wise. It's definitely some stuff that can be defeated, though, as we've seen from Notre Dame. The offense for North Carolina coming into the 2020 game, I remember all the hype about that offense coming into that game and people just raving about how good that team was and how many points they scored. Notre Dame did a pretty good job of shutting them down. You know, that year they'd scored 31, 26, 56, 28, 48, 41, 56, 59 coming into the Notre Dame game. Total yards, they were 656, 558, 576, 536, 573, and they had 742 against Wake Forest a week before playing Notre Dame. Yards per play, 6'6", 6'2", 9'9", 6'9", 6'9", 8'8", 7'6", 8'9", coming into the Notre Dame game. I mean, they had 3 games already that year where they rushed for over 300 yards. Notre Dame shut them down. First 2 drives, not pretty. After that, completely shut them down. There are things you can do to shut them down or slow them down, I should say. Notre Dame has the ability to do it. So, you know, sometimes when people listen to these shows, oh, God, how are they going to stop them? The point of this show isn't to show you how to stop it. We'll talk about that in later shows. It's to show you what they do. So when you're watching the game on Saturday, you can say, hey, look, I know what they're doing here. I have a sense of what they're doing here. So it can come across that way. But it is an offense that can be slowed down. You just have to execute. You have to attack it, and you have to be sound. And I think that's what Clark Lee did a really nice job of in 2020. It's what they did. They actually did a pretty decent job of that last year, too, if they could have just freaking contained the quarterback and not had blown assignments. They had 2 touchdowns off just blown assignments, 250, like 2 long touchdowns off blown assignments. Eliminate those, and that's a blowout. I mean, that game's not even close. And, let me see. Limit those 2 plays and tackle the flipping quarterback in the backfield, and last year's game's not close. But Drake May is similar to Sam Howell in that regard. You have to respect his ability to run the football. You also have to respect his ability to get out of the pocket and scramble. He's had some runs. They'll run read zone. A lot of his runs are just like Sam Howell. It's quarterback draw and scrambles is really what a lot of that stuff comes on. So you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared to handle that. So it's not going to be easy, but it's definitely something that can be done. And we're going to talk about that the next couple days. We're going to talk about the matchup, statistical matchup, the personnel matchups, and the things that Notre Dame can do to come out on top of this game on both sides of the ball. So before we head over to the mailbag, everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, and, of course, sign up for the message board at irishbreakdown.com. You can find the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Ryan, let's dive over to the mailbag. We have some super chats here we'll start off with. Dan Muller with a super chat. Thank you, Dan. Do you think the game plan will be the same as Ohio State? I will say no, I do not.
Yeah.
It'll be similar, but no, I do not.
As in, we think that it's going to be a conservative approach and try to keep the opposing offense off the field? Well, is that where we're aiming from?
Well, I think that, and then also I would imagine that the question has to do with the defensive game plan similar as well. I think there's 2 huge differences between North Carolina and Ohio State's offense. Number one, North Carolina will throw the ball deep a lot more than Ohio State. They are a much more aggressive downfield offense than Ohio State. Would you agree with that, Ryan?
I would 100%.
Okay. Drake May in 3 games has already hit 8 balls, completed 8 passes beyond 20 yards past the line of scrimmage. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so you compare that to C.J. Stroud, who's hit 7, but C.J. Stroud has only attempted 11 shots past 20 yards, and I don't think he attempted but a couple against Notre Dame, right? And so this is definitely a more aggressive, vertically oriented team. So you can't necessarily defend them the same exact way that you defended Ohio State, but there are a lot of similarities, in my opinion, Ryan.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that'll be similar is I do hope that Notre Dame's secondary is planning to be very physical with the North Carolina wide receiver unit, right? Like I think that's a thing that could be definitely part of the equation, but I agree with you. I don't think that it's going to be like a mirror image type of thing, right? Because also on the other side of it, it's like you're playing against a completely different defense than what you saw at Ohio State. Like Ohio State had their defense looks very much improved so far this year. And I don't think you can count on North Carolina playing well defensively, right? Like you're going to assume that they're at their best, but reality says that they're not a very good defense right now. So some implements though, Dan, I think to the question, right? Like I think being physical against the opposing wide receivers is one that you're going to see. Like Notre Dame was very, very aggressive at the line of scrimmage against Ohio State's wide receivers, which I think helped them in a lot of ways. So that's one big thing. And then I think there's going to be emphasis on running the football for Notre Dame, right? I think there has to be. So in those regards,
you don't want to get into
sure.
Ryan, even if you have a good offense, you don't want to get into a shootout with North Carolina.
Absolutely not.
Wake Forest showed that. You just eventually your defense is going to wear down, right? And you're going to not be able to make stops. I think for me, look, if you play Ohio State 5 more times, you're probably not going to hold them to 21 points anymore, ever again. I mean, it just everything kind of went right. They played well. Ohio State also didn't play great. Didn't have. I mean, there's a lot of reasons you held them to 21. I don't think it's like if Notre Dame plays Ohio State in a rematch in the playoff, or in a bowl game, just for argument's sake, you're probably not going to say, hey, well, we got to do is get to 22 and we can beat them. No, they're probably going to score more the next time. And so I don't think it's just a repeat of, just do what you did against Ohio State. And then, you're number one, you're going to have to score. Because the one thing you want to try to do, because here's the thing, North Carolina is one of the best play from behind teams in college football. Because their tempo and the way that they run, they're not afraid to keep running if they're down 17 points in the third quarter. Because of the tempo, they'll still run it on you because they'll just gash you. They're not going to, we're behind. We got to go throw the football now. They'll still do their RPOs. They're still going to run the football. So it's hard to get them out of their offense. And if you are just keep giving them the ball over and over again, they're eventually going to start scoring points. And so you're going to have to control the clock, but you can't do it in the same way they did it against Ohio State. Can't do it that way.
Yeah.
Like you have to be aggressive. You have to get points. You can be aggressive yet controlled. And that's the balance that Notre Dame is having a hard time finding right now on offense. But there are times that you do need to maybe push the tempo to get North Carolina on their heels. Because if you just allow this North Carolina team to just line up and have 30-plus seconds to get ready and get their calls in, they're going to have more success than they've had in recent weeks, especially against an offense that has shown that they have no ability to throw the ball beyond 10 yards. So a level of execution is going to have to be there as well for Notre Dame.
I think a major difference too, Brian, is like going into the Ohio State game, you thought that the offensive and defensive line could obviously out physical Ohio State. It ended up not really happening, right? Like Ohio State kind of counteract that physicality. I think you feel pretty good about the odds, though, that Notre Dame's going to come in against North Carolina and be the more physically imposing team, hopefully, right? Like on paper.
You better be.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. I mean, from what I've seen on film, even if Notre Dame is just what they were last week, I think that they'll be a more physically imposing team on the defensive and offensive line than North Carolina. So I think that's one thing, Dan, for me is I don't know how aggressive Notre Dame is going to be from a defensive perspective on the second and third levels, like from a pressure situation perspective, because I think that Notre Dame has to count that like, hey, we can get home with 4. We can dominate up front. We don't have to be this exotic defense in this game to create pressure. Like I think that you can kind of just sit back and do your thing because on paper, again, it's just on paper, Notre Dame has the more imposing offensive and defensive lines against North Carolina on paper.
Agree. So appreciate that, Dan. Good one. Daniel Uske has a super chat. Thank you. Hey, IB crew, I've been disappointed in the linebacker play so far this year. Why hasn't Jordan Patel or Junior Tuilalamaka seen the field? Any possibilities to see the field this Saturday? Jordan Patel played a lot on the Marshall game and was terrible. He was bad. So, again, here's the thing I'm going to say about linebacker. And I'm not coming down on y'all because I understand it because it's what we're saying on offense. Hey, they need to play Tobias Merriweather and play Eli Raritan. The point that I'm making is I don't think the linebacker problems are as much about talent. I think Tobias Merriweather needs to play because he is clearly the most physically gifted player that they have. They have no one else like him in the lineup, meaning 6'4", long. I made the article that I wrote yesterday. Another reason they need to play Eli Raritan and especially Tobias Merriweather is when you have a quarterback like Drew Pine, who's not a big armed, attack downfield guy, you need to give him some size to just throw it up to and to feel confident he can just get the ball to. And so there's schematic and strategic reasons why you need to play Tobias Merriweather and Eli Raritan. The problem you're having at linebacker are the reasons that you're struggling at linebacker are not because you lack athleticism or talent. Maris Luafau is arguably the most physically talented linebacker they have. It's all up here. J.D. Bertrand has regressed not because he's slow and unathletic or he's not long. It's because up here. And if those guys are struggling, then what's to say that the veterans or the young guys are going to go in and all of a sudden figure things out? And my point is, you can change out your entire linebacking core and nothing's going to change because talent's not the problem. The problem is that whatever's happening in the week of practice leading into Saturday, whatever they're teaching them Monday to Friday is not making it to Saturday. And I think part of that is because they are putting too much on them. There's too much pre-snap adjustments they have to make. There's too many post-snap responsibilities. That's why we've said they've got to scale things back and let the linebackers play fast. Once they figure that out, then you can add more onto their plate. That's especially true against North Carolina. If you're giving them a lot of different checks and looks and corrections and adjustments based on them going to motion, they will motion you to death and they will kill your linebackers in this game. So I don't think putting the younger guys or other guys on the field fixes anything until that part of this has changed. That's the difference between the advocacy for Tobias and Eli and Chris Tyree to play more and the linebackers to play more. Before it was, you're not putting your best dudes on the field. Now it's you're doing things coaching wise that are not allowing your players to play to their full potential. That's also happening on offense, but it's also about your most talented players are not there. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like you say, play Jalen Snead. Is he really that much more talented than Maris Luafau? No, he's not.
No.
Maybe eventually, but not right now.
Sure.
The issue isn't athleticism. It's they're thinking too much. They're not playing aggressively and they're not playing sound.
And I feel like there's a big misnomer at the linebacker position all the time, Brian. And like this happens in the NFL draft circle and just like the general kind of evaluation circle of linebackers. Linebacker is such a mental position, man. Like people act like it's like just a lack of athleticism and stuff, and that these, more old school linebackers can't play in today's game. That's not really true, if we're being completely honest, right? Like mental processing and eye discipline and the ability to be quick out of your trigger are so important at linebacker. If you have that baseline, linebackers can play football. After that, it's like, okay, now they're a very technically sound and savvy player and also a crazy athlete, right? Like that kind of takes you to the next level. But I really do think there's like this big misnomer of like that Notre Dame's linebackers lack athleticism. They lack this talent. I disagree with it. I disagree with it eminently. Like right now, Maris Luafau is not playing bad football or below average football, however you want to quantify it, because he lacks athleticism or size. That's not why, right? Like it's eye discipline. It's trigger. Those are the things that are making him not play great football. Is Jack Kaiser a bad athlete? Absolutely not. He's not a bad athlete. That's not why he's playing bad athlete.
Right.
Yes. Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the which is the nuance to playing the linebacker position, right? Like there's lack of nuance at the position right now, which I think is what's holding them back personally.
And doesn't change if you switch the personnel out.
Yes.
I mean, that's the reality of it.
Well, because the guys that everyone wants to see play, the Jalen Sneeds of the world, and like cool,
Prince
man.
Collie,
I want to see them play too.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. I want to see them play too. Prince Collie and Junior Tuialamaka. I want to see all those guys play too. But the fact of the matter is that we're talking about the fact that the nuance and the savviness of playing the position is what's lacking in the linebackers right now. So we're going to put first and second year players on the field, and that's going to change. Like that's not how that changes.
Ryan, if this was a situation like 2020 with Shane Simon, I'd be advocating for Prince Collie to play now. Right. If Maris Luafau was, he was there, he was where he was supposed to be, he just was having no impact, I'd be advocating for him to get benched for Prince Collie. What we're saying is, yes, the linebackers are not playing well. That's on them because they're not executing, but it's not just on them. Somebody said, like, how can a group with Marcus Freeman, James Laurinaitis, and Al Gold not have good linebacker play? I'm like, that's exactly the problem, because you have these really wicked smart coaches who have these really smart kids. And they don't realize like what college kids can do in practice isn't always necessarily what they can do in games when everything is sped up. And the other team is showing you looks at, you're giving the offensive scout team guys a card. You know exactly what they're going to do on every single play. You don't know that on Saturday, right? And that's the problem. And so that doesn't change with personnel changes. Now, if we start to see the coaches maybe scale things back and they're just not making plays, then I will be the first one sitting there pounding on the table, say, hey, give Prince Scully a shot, give Jalen Snead a shot, give Junior Tuilalamaka a shot. I'll be the first one to say that. But you got to fix the other part first and then see what your linebackers are doing. And then if they're still not playing well, then you make a change. And that's kind of
I don't think there's been a legitimate and fair evaluation to some of the linebackers at this point, right? To your point, like, are they being put in the best position possible? If the answer is no, then that's not a player fault, although the player definitely is not still playing well.
Sure.
But like, it's not a clean evaluation to look at a player that isn't being used the best to their ability and say that guy can't play. I don't think that's fair. That's not a fair evaluation.
Agree. I have an interesting super chat from Michael S. I haven't got one this. How successful was your preview of Cal compared to actual results? Where were you right and where were you wrong? I always love questions like this. I don't think I was wrong anywhere. I think Cal is exactly who we thought they were. Pretty good on defense and a team that had good skill on offense, as we saw, and a team that had a bad offensive line. And so, you look at our keys to the game, Ryan, when we talked last week, on offense, our number one key to the game, and we talked about how the O-line has to play better. They did. We said adjust your personnel. They did that to a degree. They put Chris Tyree in. He was a focal point on the offense. It's what we said they needed to do. And lo and behold, Chris Tyree plays well and the offense is going. Another thing we said that they needed to do against Cal was spread them out formationally. They did that. And what we said was you spread them outside and you get to the perimeter early. That's going to soften up the run game. Well, what did Notre Dame have? I shouldn't say they didn't have success from an execution standpoint, but they had a success from a scheme standpoint, was getting guys open on the perimeter. Even though that Notre Dame dropped some balls and missed some throws, Cal knows, hey, we're getting out leveraged. And you saw Cal adjust, and then that really opened up in the second half the run game. And so, the other thing is we said get Drew Pine into an early rhythm. He didn't, and the offense struggled. Second half, he went 10 of 11. They were easy throws, but he got into a rhythm, and the offense was able to score 17 points in the second half. So I think we nailed that one pretty well. Defensively, it was a much more easy game plan. It was dominate up front and limit and protect against the deep balls. And they pretty much did that, right? And when they got beat on defense, it's because they gave up plays on the deep game, right? I mean, both of the scores came on deep ball. And then, of course, there's always the same issues of tackling, and they didn't tackle well. And that resulted in some big things too. So I think we nailed it pretty good, Ryan. I mean, and both of our score predictions were close. I think you had what was your score prediction?
27-13.
Okay, close-ish. So you were close-ish. I went 2016, which was close as well. So I think we nailed that one pretty good. If I don't say so myself.
If I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, I think we had a good week.
Well, I got asked. I mean, the guy asked the question, so
I know I'm being serious. Yeah,
I think we pretty much nailed that matchup last week. So got it pretty good. Tavis McKay, do offensive coordinators need to have play calls already prepared before games to run instantly in cases such as 2 Cal complete passes? If yes, what kind of play calls would go to ones? So I think this is kind of the hurry up thing, Ryan. And yes, you will have that. You will have things built into if you need to hustle up and get a ball snapped, right? The other thing you can do is if it's a long pass play, you'll teach your quarterback and receivers as they're running downfield to look at the sideline and get a play call. So you don't necessarily have to have this is the play we will run, but you can quickly get the play call in. But yes, they will have those things. They'll have things where if it was like a long game, they'll just line up and run wedge. Or just run inside zone. Just go. If we're telling you and so what'll happen, Ryan, is the coaches will give a signal. They'll have like a word, which means line up and snap the ball, right? And then the quarterback will know what the call is. He'll have one of 2 calls depending on the scenario. Usually he'll have a couple calls, and then he'll quickly, so as you're running down the field, the quarterback is yelling, and Tiger, you know that they're lining up and they're running, inside zone to the right, or lion. And now, they're quickly running inside zone or something to the left. And in that situation, we're lining up and we're snapping the ball. And it's the quarterback's job to quickly get up there, make sure everyone's lined up, and then bam, we're going on. And usually it's first sound, or on the center on the snap. You have the two hurry up calls are on first sound or on snap. On snap means everyone's just watching the center, and the center snaps the ball when he's ready, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much how those will work. So yeah, that's usually. Well, I'll tell you this: if you're a well-coached team, that's part of what you've built into your offense, no question. And we've seen that from Notre Dame in the past, where they don't do that. Where you're just like, hurry up and freaking snap the ball, but they're looking around, they're making checks, they're making calls, because clearly they weren't prepared to have a hurry up and snap the dang football call.
Yeah.
And that's something that's been missing at Notre Dame. And so that's on offense. And defensively, I like the Coach Freeman kind of owned that on yesterday. He's like, maybe I should have called a timeout. I'm like, maybe. And you definitely should have called a timeout. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, that's going to be part of the learning process for a young coach. Right, is in the future, you're the head coach now. Make the call, right?
And he's going to be judged on the next game where there's a similar situation that happens, right? Like it's about learning and
he said something too, Ryan. He said even if we don't get the call, you get the call overturned, we're able to settle the defense down and get the call we wanted in. So
exactly.
Both of those things, even if you don't get it overturned, it's okay. Line up, get your defense. Reset their minds. If they're upset about this, reset your minds. Here's what the call is.
100%.
So I was glad
I always,
said that.
Brian, usually I'm a big fan of timeouts right after a change of possession off like a turnover or something. Because what happens every time there's like a big turnover in a game, the offense is going to take a shot down the field because everybody's psyche is kind of broken, right? Like it's like one of those quick things.
Trying to sneak a score.
I think, exactly. You take a shot when your mind isn't right? So that's interesting that you say that.
Yep, absolutely. We had another super chat down here, a couple more super chats down here that I wanted to get to. Let me pull these up here real fast. All right. Tyler Smith with a super chat. Thank you. He said, Brian, I saw your break down the Pine to Tyree passing TD where Pine looked off of Tyree and looked to his right. Does that show that Pine has a lot of trust in his offensive line? Oh, I think so. I mean, if you don't trust your offensive line, you're not looking a guy off. You're staring down your receiver and trying to get rid of the ball. Yeah, I think that does that. Yeah. I think it's also trusting the system. I think that's the other part of it is like trust. You do what you're taught to do? And then Drew's a gamer too. Like Drew's played a lot of football between high school football, and this was a kid that was at every 7-on-7 event that he could possibly play in as a high school kid. Drew's a competitive kid.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it too, is like, look, this is what I need to do to make this play. I need a pump fake to get this guy over there and get that to open this up. It was a savvy play of a kid that was struggling, and he was pretty good after that. I mean, he wasn't perfect, but he was pretty good after that, at least from the stuff they were asking him to do, which was not to test the ball down the field a whole lot. But yeah, I think that shows trust, Tyler, and also shows trust in the offensive line, and also shows trust in the system, because you kind of threw blind back to Tyree. You know what I mean? Because you're trusting
yourself as well. I mean, trust in every aspect, really.
Well,
when you think
I don't think
about
he
it.
trusted himself a whole lot. That's why he aimed the ball to Tyree and made him kind of slow up for it. He didn't like rip that sucker out there, but he threw with a lot more conviction after that. How about that?
Yeah.
Ray Holcraft with a super chat. Ray, thank you very much. How does our defense stop Drake May from running the ball off of a busted play or called play?
Get him on the ground.
Gap discipline. Don't run past the quarterback and tackle. There was a play last year where Sam Howell ran for 20 yards. It should have been a 7-yard sack by Isaiah Foskey. I mean, that's the biggest thing is, and here's the thing. I would rather him step into the pocket than step out of the pocket. That's the other thing that hurt them is when they steps out of the pocket, then the linebackers are going to have a tougher time chasing them down. I also think you need to really rethink how your linebackers are playing. I didn't understand why they kept stepping into the line to defend the backs on checkdowns. Stay back. And then if the back releases and you got to take them, then take them. Because what North Carolina is going to do that Cal did not do a lot of and should have is free releases from their backs. Wheels, angles, seams. They're going to do a lot of that stuff. And especially if J.D. Bertrand's stepping down, he's going to have a much hard – well, it won't be J.D. Bertrand in the first half, but second half. But Bo Bauer, Junior Tuilaumaka, Maris Wolfow, whoever, if they're not – I mean, a team that has linebackers that are as undisciplined and unproductive as Notre Dame has been, I'm going after them early with my backs and tight ends, early, and trying to have some success. So I think keeping whoever you're, I don't want to say spy because you're not spying him. You're not just spying Drake May, but you're spying the backfield, whether for it's a leak from the running back or the quarterback taking off. I think is the big key.
Short zone defenders. Yeah.
Yep. But the interior of the defensive line has to know I have reached my point of no return. I can't keep, like Jason Adamiola is especially a guy for this. You reach a point in time where you see that quarterback in your peripheral and you know I'm about to pass him. You're not making the sack at that point in time. It's like it's spin back inside, right? Spin back inside or stop and cover that gap, right? Because if he spins out, Foskey's right there waiting on. But I can't let him step into that gap and play it. So it's gap discipline and then just teaching your guys to say you can't as an interior defender, you can't run past the quarterback. And they did that a lot on Saturday. So yes, that needs, and if you have a free run as a corner fire, take the upfield shoulder.
Yes.
Never get spy. That's the biggest pet peeve of mine on blitzes. When you blitz off the edge and you let a guy spin out, I hate that. Because my thing is, as a quarterback, when I was coming and I could see you in my peripheral off the back, I knew I could spin out from you, right? Because you were coming at a too level of an angle where I could spin out and get outside of you. But if you're coming at the right angle, I'm not going to see you. And so that's when you go for the throwing shoulder in that instance. So discipline, Ryan, tackle, right? Discipline, tackle, discipline, tackle, discipline, tackle. It's not that simple, but it's that simple, right? It's really not that simple to execute, but it's that simple to say.
It really is. I mean, at the end of the day, man, get the guy on the ground. That's all that matters, right? And I think interior pressure is going to be huge in this game, Brian. I know we're not doing keys to victory, but with this quarterback who actually has pretty decent pocket movements, interior pressure, being able to kind of threaten him early on, I think that's going to kind of rattle him a little bit. So, and that'll lead to, as quarterbacks get more frantic, usually they're a little easier to tackle. So to kind of add on to that.
Yep. Absolutely. We got another super chat down here from another one from Tyler Smith. Thank you, Tyler, very much for that. Says, can you guys ask Freeman if he can put Mayer at fullback? I want to see him either run it up the middle or body someone. I'm not going to ask him that.
Text him right now, Brian.
Hold on a second. I'm going to say, Coach, somebody wants it. I don't think that's necessarily great usage of Michael Mayer as a fullback to run it up the middle or body someone. You know what I would like to see them do, however, is I would like to see them use Mayer in a way where they can hide him a little bit more behind the line with some stuff, Ryan. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, sneak him out of the backfield, send him on unders. I mean, they're doing some of the under stuff. Send him on wheels from the backfield a little bit more. That's what the wheel route was against Marshall. He was lined up in kind of a wing, like almost kind of in the backfield, and then he kind of got, the motion allowed him to kind of peek by. That's something that North Carolina does all the time that Notre Dame should do more of. They use the motion to free that guy up, and then Mayer, they ran a clear with the outside guy. They used the motion to suck down the linebackers, and then Mayer just wheeled right outside of them. I mean, that's what North Carolina does all the time effectively.
We just spent a lot of time talking about post-snap switches. I mean, I would love to see Michael Mayer as like the X receiver and have this slot on the line of scrimmage and short motion him to do some post-snap switch stuff and just kind of getting a little bit of a clean release, man. Like, yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's ways. And honestly, folks, if you want to go watch a couple of the North Carolina games from this past year, from the first couple of weeks, they do a great job of just scheming easy stuff for their tight ends in the middle of the field. So I agree with you, Brian. Like, I think there's ways that you can make it easier for Michael Mayer right now, because stuff's not always easy for him right now. I mean, because everyone knows who he is, right? So there's definitely ways that you can take advantage of his skill set still.
Yep. And then use him more effectively as a decoy to open other things up. I think that's another part of it too. Is when you know teams are overplaying him, use that. Go ahead, Ryan.
Or you can run a triple option and put Mayer at fullback. I'm there for that.
No. See, now you were doing well. You were doing so well. We're an hour and 40 into the show. I haven't had one time where you've ticked me off with some kind of sarcastic comment, and then you just had to go there. And you went straight for the jugular, Ryan. You went straight for triple option. I mean, you just went right for the heart of it, man.
What would have been worse if I would have said him at fullback or him as the option quarterback? Which one would have dug it deeper?
I mean, honestly, the thing that digs deep is the triple option. I don't care where you put him. It's just a triple option. It can't get any worse than just triple option. I mean, that is the worst case scenario is triple option. So
when the next NCAA game comes out, we're going to play a game and I'm going to win with the triple option against you.
Yeah. All right. It's not happening. But yes, yes, people have tried that before. Let's just say I'm no Evan Sharpley. I don't lose to Navy. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there.
Oh, that was mean. That was mean.
There we go. There we go. Kyle Wade says, "Who's the singular most dangerous player for North Carolina for you guys?" I think it's Drake May, and the reason I say that is because. It's not the lazy answer like he's the quarterback, he has to get the ball, but because he can hit you with those, you think everything is covered and it's 3rd and 12 and he can scramble and pick up a first down because of the way that they play. That makes him the most dangerous player. Not most, because the question was not most explosive or best or whatever, but who's the most dangerous player? If Drake May gets into an early rhythm and the defense plays undisciplined with gap control and contain as they have the last 2 weeks, Drake May is going to have a monster game. So that's who it is for me, Ryan. How about you? What's your taste?
That's actually where I was leading, especially since Josh Downs is going to be back for this game, but he's going to be coming off an injury. So, I don't know exactly how – I don't know if it'll be 100% per se, right? But, because everybody knows that, I mean, we're both huge fans of Josh Downs, right? He's one of the best wide receivers in all of college football. He's a fantastic player. But for me, I know what Drake May's been doing, right? I know that he's been just killing it over the last few weeks. I'm interested to see him against a – better defense than he's played over the first 3 weeks. But I mean, I agree, Brian. I think what I've seen of Drake May over the first 3 weeks, and again, against App State, Georgia State, Florida A&M, right? So it's not a daunting task so far.
Right.
But Drake May looks good, man.
Yes.
Looks really good. So
he's taking shots, he's getting hit in the face, he's willing to let go, in pressure. He's played well. He's played well. Got another super chat down here from Fred Stadelbauer, and his question is, you guys rock. Thank you. 2 questions. Number 1, why are we not using consistent jet sweeps and misdirection? It's a good question. 2, transfer QB targets next year. PS BK is rooting for UNC. That's good, Fred. I like that. Transfer quarterback targets for next year. We talked about this earlier in the week. I'm not really worried about that right now. I don't have a clue who a good transfer quarterback would be, because it's going to require some sort of kid to get benched late in the year for a young player, some sort of change of coaching, some kid that has a good year, but just look at, there's so much that's going to go into it. It's look, Bryce Young's not going to transfer to Notre Dame next year, right? I mean, Caleb Williams isn't going to be a transfer to Notre Dame next year, right? Drake May, a couple weeks ago, someone was like, you think Drake May would transfer to Notre Dame? Why in the world?
Why would he do that?
Drake May want to transfer to Notre Dame, right? I mean, he's from North Carolina, and he's putting up monster numbers in that offense while Notre Dame's not completing passes beyond 5 yards past the line of scrimmage, right? So just right now, it's just not – Fred's not even on my radar. I'm totally fine with you asking, Fred. No, I don't – this is not an attack or a shot at you. I get why you're asking that question. It's just, for me, it's just not on my radar right now. I'm curious to see how Drew Pine develops. But transfer quarterback is definitely something Notre Dame needs to do. And it has nothing to do with C.J. Carr. If C.J. Carr chooses to reclassify, they still need to go get a veteran quarterback, because C.J. Carr in 2023 is not your answer. C.J. Carr coming as an early enrollee, as a reclassified kid, is to get him ready for 2024 so he has a year in the offense, right?
Yeah.
It is not to have him start in 2023. If that happens, that's not good. I don't want a quarterback starting when he should be a senior. JT Daniels couldn't do it. There aren't a lot of dudes that can do it, in my opinion, because that's about as advanced of a kid as you can have. So it's needed. It's just the timing of the discussion for me is just not right now, Ryan. That's where I'm at.
Agree. And if I could comment just on the first part of Fred's question, I know you kind of answered it already, Brian, that yes, I agree. But I think that jet sweeps.
Specifics of why. Get into specifics of why they should be using them more.
If you're struggling to run the football over the first couple games, that tells me that there's probably an issue with numbers in the box, right? So how's a way to get numbers out of the box, or at least destroy the eye discipline of second-level defenders? It's based upon movement, man. And trading, motioning, jet sweeps, it's making eyes move on the second level, and that can create numbers advantages, that can create leverage advantages. That's the biggest thing. Misdirection, absolutely. Again, don't make things easy for a defense if you're not performing well on the offensive side of the football. Misdirection, killing eye discipline, all those things can help a struggling offense. And that's why I feel like it should be kicked up a notch, right? And you have also guys like Braden Lindsey, who have made plays in that role in the past. So let's utilize that skill set.
Right. Several. Yeah, and I think it can open up some shots down the field. It can open up some other teams. Look, the reality is Notre Dame has to manufacture offense better. And that's the frustrating thing, right, is that's one of the things I thought Tommy did a really good job of second half of the year last year was manufacturing offense. Now, I get he doesn't have Jack Cohn at quarterback right now, right? And I just love it how there were so many people that crapped on Jack Cohn last year, and we defended the kid because the problems early in the year were not Jack Cohn's fault. When he finally got time to throw, Jack was really good.
Yeah.
You don't have a fifth-year senior like Jack Cohn who's played a lot of football, led a team to a Big Ten championship game, played in the Rose Bowl. You don't have that guy right now, right? And they just did not do the things where they built around Tyler Buckner in a way. Like they were trying to run a Jack Cohn pass offense with the Tyler Buckner rush offense, and it just wasn't working. You needed to build around Tyler's ability early on differently, and then eventually get to the more intricate pass stuff. And, it's one game of Drew Pine. It's too early to know what the game plan is going to look like moving forward with him. But, yeah, they got to do more to scheme guys open. And that's why Tyree needed to be on the field, because he's a guy that you can scheme plays for, and he can make big plays as we saw on Saturday, right? That's why Tobias Merriweather needs to be on the field. That's why Eli Rare needs – beyond the fact that a freaking freshman is your best blocking tight end, which is a compliment to him because he's battling hard and he's a freshman, and also a smack in the face to the veterans. Kevin Bauman and Michael Mayer, like, how the heck are you letting that kid block better than you? It's number one. But that's why those guys need to play, Ryan, because those are the playmakers that you have. Those are the guys that you can say, if you can design stuff for them, they can do big things. And it's why we've advocated for Braden Lindsey being used differently. They keep asking Braden Lindsey to play a game that is not suited to what he does well, nearly enough. And, so, hey, he's not playing well. Yeah, because you're not building around what he does. What is the stuff that he did so well in 2016 or 19? Jet sweeps, reverses, climb routes, cross routes, and a post route. Chip Long wasn't calling back shoulder one-on-ones to Braden Lindsey. He wasn't asking him to win one-on-ones on the outside, against corners and stuff like that. Now, there's some things that they can do to do that, in my opinion, but not in the boundary. Be doing it as the field. The post route that Ian Book hit Lindsey on in 2019 was a field shot. Put him in the slot more and let him run some of those routes against a safety that's off the ball. So it's a usage problem to me, not a player problem only. Now, there's some guys that are just not playing well. Jaden Thomas is not playing well. He's not been good. So, I do think there need to be some changes. But, the way I look at it, Ryan, I just think that how they're using that talent is also part of the problem. And that's just something that needs to get corrected. Got some more questions up here. We've got Matt Altenberger. Is it a hot take to say that this game is a turning point of the season? I don't think that's a hot take at all.
I don't think that's hyperbolic at all, Matt, if I'm being honest. Like, this is it gets you back to 500. You start feeling a little bit better about yourselves, and you're about to start getting into the meat of the schedule. Like, you're going to be seeing BYU here pretty soon. You go into a bye week, and you're feeling a little bit better about yourself now moving forward. So I think that this can be a huge injection of confidence if you're able to play well. And I think it can be a semi-turning point of the season, because I think that right now you're just trying to get back into an identity. And I think last week, I think that there was a push towards an identity, but I still don't think Notre Dame's completely understood exactly what they are yet.
Right. Will E, in my opinion, this will be a defining game for Marcus Freeman. His adjustments will be critical. If he can't get the team ready, that tells a story. I think that's accurate. You're past the quarter. You're past the first quarter of the season. You're kind of going into the first third of the season on Saturday. So, if you can't get this team ready to play technically, emotionally. Now, what I'll say is Notre Dame was emotionally ready to play against Cal, and they were emotionally ready to play against Ohio State. I think the issue against Marshall was the letdown aspect. If you'd put so much into beating Ohio State and to lose that way, I think the team did not respond well, and they took Cal for granted. They're not taking North Carolina for granted. And because most of these guys remember chasing these guys around last year and how challenging that game was. So they're not going to take it for granted, but can you get them to be ready from an execution standpoint? That's a big question mark, Ryan. And how that gets answered is going to go a long way towards determining how well does Coach Freeman get this team rallied back from mistakes? How well does he get this team, this coaching staff, and then down to the players to make adjustments of things that are not going well? This is what I've said. The most important things that a head coach does are from Monday to Friday, not Saturday. Now, are there times when something like the timeout call is something that a head coach can do? Sure. But if you don't have a team ready Monday to Friday, it won't matter. This team on Saturday against Cal was ready to play mentally. Did they execute well? No, they didn't. But they were ready to play. They were mentally locked in. They played hard. They played with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. They played like they had something to prove, and they did. Now you've got to keep that going, but then clean up the execution on both sides of the ball. Those are going to be the keys to this. And that's where Marcus Freeman will be judged, as any head coach will be judged, is how ready do you get your team to play week after week, and how effectively can you get them to develop and grow and improve as the season goes on. Those are going to be the keys.
I can't believe after this week, Brian, we're already a third of the way through the season, regular season.
I know.
That's insane, man.
Know.
Absolutely insane.
It takes forever to get there, and then it just flies by.
Yes.
John A. with a question, Ryan. I'll have you answer this one. We finally saw the D-line play aggressively and disrupt versus Cal. Do you think they will carry over to practice and create the good-on-good we thought was happening in camp?
They have to, John, if we're being honest. This is a situation where, look, on paper, you were a better defensive line than what Cal had offensively on the offensive line, right? You're going into a very similar situation this week. North Carolina's offensive line is not good. It's not very good. It's not. So Notre Dame, in order to potentially win this game, or at least make it a game, you have to dominate both the offensive and defensive lines in this football game, right? So Notre Dame on paper has a advantage in this football game from a defensive line perspective versus the offensive line of North Carolina. And for them to be a successful team, it has to continue. It just has to, right? Will it continue? We'll see. But on paper, it should continue this week. There's no doubt about it.
Next question, also from John A1, is the Notre Dame offense going to be able to give the defense a good look in practice and preparation for North Carolina? That's a bigger question now than it was a week ago, because now the guy that would have been running scout team, Steve Angeli, who could give you a good look, because Steve is a kid that has a good arm. He's a kid that is tall like Drake May. He's a kid that can move in the pocket effectively. Now he's probably not running scout team for you. It's probably Ron Paulus III, who is not a real mobile guy. So, yeah, that's a concern. That's a concern for me. And this is where the lack of depth at receiver and running back is also problematic, because you're not throwing, really talented young receivers at them, because those guys, you only have one, and he has to play and should be playing on your top level. So, yeah, it's a good question, John. Are they going to be able to give him a good look? I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that.
And who the heck is going to be playing Josh Downs in practice this week? I have no idea. Right? Because even Tobias is 6'4". He's nothing like Josh Downs.
Right. Braden Lindsey. Yeah. I mean, maybe my point is maybe this is the week you do a little bit of good on good in some of these team sessions. You know what I mean?
It's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Because there's some concepts that Notre Dame does that Cal does. Like last year, Cal a couple times ran that wide fade from the slot. Notre Dame likes to run that. There are some things that they do that are a little bit crossover. You could maybe have some looks with each other in those situations as well. So we'll see. Got a super chat from Michael S. How complicated is North Carolina's offense compared to Ohio State? Similarly, I would say Ohio State has a little bit more complexity to it post-snap, where North Carolina has a lot of great complexities formationally and movement pre-snap. And then they do more post-snap switching type of stuff than Ohio State does. But post-snap, similar. Maybe Ohio State slightly more complex than North Carolina's, but neither is an overly complicated offense. Agreed. Looking at it from an offensive standpoint. Defensively, they're both complicated to defend because of all the different things that they do. Like the way they'll run the same play 4 different ways, and that's what makes it complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Weiss's last belt loop, coach, what you're saying is obvious stuff. So, like, I like how he starts us off with like a slap in the face. Like, we're just out here like giving football 101, like everybody knows, right? Like, okay, Charlie, this is obvious stuff. Everybody already knew it. How do you and we as fans see it? I don't even know why we're doing the show today because Charlie Weiss's last belt loop kind of already had everything figured out. So we just kind of wasted 2 hours because everybody already knew it. But I don't know why the coaches don't see it. Charlie, I have no idea why they don't see it. They get paid millions, but can't adjust coaching to see the obvious. I don't know. Number one, some of this isn't as obvious as you think it is. Number one, because things that you were doing in camp that were working did not work as well when you started playing other teams. And that happens sometimes. But yes, there are things that they need to do that should be considered obvious. Other things that are not as obvious. And some things are obvious or easy to say, but harder to fix, Ryan. And that's another thing that fans don't realize about football is, oh, they need to run the ball better. Okay. How? Right? They need to throw the ball downfield better. Okay. How?
And from a teaching perspective too, Brian, like sometimes easy things are hard to teach at times. I know that sounds really counterproductive, but like some things are so natural, like from just like a body positioning, whatever, like just natural to your mind may not be natural to someone else's mind. Right. So like you're trying to teach a concept and it's like, that it should be easier for them to understand in your opinion, even though honestly, it's just something that's different to them. Right. So I think there's a lot of complexity that goes to it, man. It's just not go here, do that better. Okay. How? Right. Like we need some instruction on how we're going to get to that point. Right. So,
yep. I'm going to bring this question up and I'm not quite sure what he's asking, but I'm going to take it a certain direction. How many, and what types of throws must a competent college quarterback make? Can Drew Pine make those passes? Well, number one, Nicholas, I like the question if I'm reading it correctly. But the answer is, to a degree, is it depends on the system.
Yeah, what system?
Like, for example, some systems are going to require their quarterbacks to throw the ball downfield a lot, and other systems are not. Some systems are going to ask quarterbacks to throw in rhythm a lot, and others do not. Some systems are going to ask a guy to make full field reads and all those kind of things. Here's what I'll say about Drew Pine. There are some throws that Drew Pine is just not going to be able to make. Drew Pine is not going to bang a far hash go route that's not on rhythm. Like if he's going to, like, let's just say North Carolina comes out and they're just playing cover 1, Ryan, or cover 0. And you've got it because you're in 12 personnel and they're just going to say, hey, we know you're not going to throw to the field. We're going to leave that guy one-on-one. Drew Pine can catch, drop and rock and throw and hit that throw. But Drew Pine is not going to go through his read, see a guy coming open late, and launch it 60 yards down the field for a touchdown. That's just not who he is. Drew is not going to scramble around like Phil Dracovic and launch a 40-yard backside in cut for a completion. He's just not going to do that. But the there's not a throw that Jack Cohn made last year that Drew Pine can't physically make.
Agreed.
It's not about the physical thing for Drew to run this offense at a high level. There's not many throws that I've seen Drake May make so far in this offense that I don't think Drew Pine can physically make. Would you agree or disagree with that last statement, Ryan? Well, both of those with Jack Cohn and Drake May. There's a couple like just bombs, but the post route that we drew up in a play against App State, that ball went like 40 yards in the air. Drew Pine can make that throw, right? I haven't seen him throwing a lot of field out cuts or field comebacks. I'd say the one throw that I would point to is he banged a corner route early against App State that took some arm talent because he was getting hit in the face. You know which play I'm talking about? It was like going in, I think it was their first or second score of the game. I don't know if that's a throw. That's why I said most throws. I don't know if that's a throw that Drew Pine can make with a guy in his face. Now, if Drew's got a clean pocket, there's no doubt he can bang a 25-yard corner route. But can he do it when he's off his back foot and the guy's coming? That's a little different deal. But that's one pass in 3 games, right? It's can he do it accurately? Can he do it decisively? And the biggest thing is, can he do it with confidence? That's the key. And Drew's got to do things in rhythm that other quarterbacks can do late in a play. And so that's why it's important that Tommy Rees number one, put different personnel on the field. That's why you need Tobias Merriweather and Eli Raridan in the game more, because Drew can just say, hey, look, the pressure's coming. I got a one-on-one. I got a 6'4.5" corner against a 5'11" receiver. A 6'4.5" receiver against a 5'11" corner and no safety help. This isn't rocket science, right? Throw it out there and throw it high and let your guy go get it. That doesn't require you to be Trevor Lawrence, right? And what Tommy Rees has to do is find ways to get his best personnel on the field, get them in some isolation stuff, and then give Drew some relatively simple reads. If you watch North Carolina play, Ryan, there's a lot of plays where you know that the two outside receivers are not really options because of the way the other team lined up. Now, every player is an option pre-snap, but the alignment will say, okay, they're playing this cover, so that guy is not part of my read. I'm going here to check down. Doing more stuff like that, then the receivers actually have to run the route like they give a crap, which we're not seeing a lot from the outside receivers. When they know they're not going to be an option, they just kind of jog off the field, and everybody knows they're not getting the ball, right? North Carolina's receivers usually run with more conviction than that.
Yeah.
So I think those are all types of things we need to see schematically, and then Drew has to have the confidence to just let it rip. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to get yelled at. Right? You didn't get yelled at because you were, not willing to throw a ball. You got yelled at because you missed on those throws. Let them rip. Right? Let her rip. Go make the plays, because you don't have Tyler looking over your shoulder. So he's got to play with confidence, and the more he plays, the more he'll have that. But Tommy Rees has got to scheme him into success as well, and scheme the personnel into success. And part of the way that you can help a 6 foot, not experienced quarterback is to not ask him to throw to a bunch of 5'11", 6 foot guys who aren't getting separation because of the type of schemes that you're having them run. You're running stuff that honestly, Ryan, they're running an offense right now that you'd run if you had Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool at receiver. Stop routes, out cuts, one-on-ones, into the boundary, curl routes, stuff like that, in cuts, stuff that you're like, okay, that's what you would have run with Miles and Chase, but not with a bunch of fast 6 foot guys. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that needs to change, in my opinion.
I agree. I think confidence is the biggest thing for me, and you kind of reiterated that a ton, Brian. People get super hyperbolic, right? Like they watch the game against Cal, and they're like, "Oh, Drew Pine can't throw the ball over 10 yards." But like in reality, yeah, he can. Is he the strongest arm quarterback?
We saw him throw a 30. Right, we saw him throw a 30+ yard outside go route for a touchdown against Cincinnati last year.
My point. It's 100%, man. It's something where, like, can he do it? Yes, he can do it, but you have to believe that you can do it, right? Like, that's the biggest thing. Does he have a howitzer for an arm? No. Does he have the strongest arm in the world? Absolutely not. Does he have a great arm? No. But the fact of the matter is that he's still a Division I quarterback. Like, he can still make those throws. It's just about the confidence. And what makes great quarterbacks great is that they can manage those chaos, and they have the confidence to still make that throw, right? Like, that's what makes them special. Drew Pine he has a good enough arm and good enough talent to get the job done. It's just about a confidence level thing for me. 100%.
That's right. Last couple, John A1, is the Notre Dame offense going to be able to give the defense? Oh, we already answered that one. It's a great question. I had to read it twice. Last one then from Christopher Galloway. Christopher, thank you very, very much for this. How many of the defensive linemen are being double teamed on any play? Could this be the issue with the linebackers not getting off blocks because the linemen are not getting double teamed? No, that's not really it, I don't think. I mean, we're seeing a lot of double teams. What's happening, Ryan, is that's actually one of the things that's hurting the D-line is they're getting double teamed, but because the linebackers aren't attacking, they're able to stay on that double team. Because the way a double team works is we're going to stay on this double team until the second guy that we're working off of threatens. So if Ryan and I are working on a double team on that line right there, we're going to keep driving that sucker until the guy behind it flashes. If he stays back there, we're just going to keep driving on you. So what you do is I'm hitting this gap, you crash there, and I can't keep that double team because I'm working here, Ryan's, and I'm telling Ryan, hey, you gotta come to me. You need to overtake this guy, right? But if that linebacker crashes and hits me in the face before Ryan can come over and overtake that guy, we're both getting beat. Right. And that's what aggressive linebackers do is you read your key and then you fly downhill to your response. You fit off that defensive lineman properly. And so what we're seeing now is like there's plays where Jason Adamiola will come off and really rock a guy back. But then what happens is that other tackle whams him from the outside and then Jason gets knocked back. and they just stay on that block and they just keep rocking them back. That's going to be true no matter who you're playing or how big your guy is.
Yep.
Because if two guys that weigh 600 pounds are taking on me who weighs 320 pounds and they're any good, I'm losing that battle if I don't get some help, right? And so that's why the linebackers need to crash. And then that's when you'll see, because we've seen that, was it Marshall, right? They're trying to work a double team, and then Marshall's linebackers just crash hard, and then they come off the double team, and then they end up both missing the guy or whiffing on the guy. So I like, Chris, I think you're thinking of, like, your head's going in the right direction. And I think that in theory, kind of what you're saying is true, but it's the reverse. I would say the reverse is true. Would you say that, Ryan? Where the D linemen are having a little bit of trouble because the linebackers aren't playing well, as opposed to the linebackers are not playing well because the D line is getting double teamed, right?
Which is kind of funny because it is usually the other way around. Usually linebackers don't play well because the defensive line isn't doing their responsibilities. But I think it's making them look worse, Brian, too. I mean, it just from not even from a functional perspective, it's like, I think defensive line, interior defensive line especially, are doing their job a lot. It's just the linebackers aren't making the plays that are designed for them to make, man. It's just making them look bad from both sides.
Yeah. Yep. There's no doubt about that. So, Ryan, that is going to do it for today. And we're going to be back tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern. Obviously, we will have the IB Nation Sports Talk Show with Sean Stiers as your host. They'll have plenty more to talk about when it comes to Notre Dame football. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to do sort of our stacking up and matchups breakdown. We'll kind of we'll dive a little deeper into the individual numbers of the run game, Notre Dame run defense versus North Carolina run offense, and the opposite matchup, the pass game versus pass offense versus pass defense of both units, and then just overall kind of dive into the weeds a little bit more from a statistical standpoint, and then a personnel matchup standpoint. Be what we'll do tomorrow. And we'll talk more and more about, where Notre Dame has some advantages and where there's some concerns. Thursday will be keys to the game. We'll dive into the specifics of what does Notre Dame need to do to have success in this game. And then, of course, Friday, it is prediction time. So, Ryan, that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks to everybody. Hit that like button, folks. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Sign up for the IB Nation or Irish Breakdown message board. That's at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you're listening via podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. Don't forget to follow and sign up for the CFB Nation. The guys are actually recording a show right now as we speak. The part 1 will come out tomorrow. Part 2 will come out on Thursday. That is Bill Bender and Bill Troche from Sporting News. I'm working on a couple other things I'm hoping to be able to add to the CFB Nation. We'll see here in a little bit, but we're definitely still trying to grow that. But make sure you follow and also listen to the CFB Nation show as well. So for Ryan Roberts, I'm Brian Driscoll. Thank you all so much for being with us. Have a great day, and thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.